Welcome from the bowels of hell.
The Dana Gould Hour.
Jungle worms and swamp rats run around your feet.
I bought a dog that killed the calf, that ate the canary. What is truth?
And once again, welcome back.
And we're back. It's summertime, and the living is easy. For someone, somewhere, it must be, right? It's summertime and the living is easy. For bears, Will Sloan is here. Will is a journalist and author. He is the host of the podcast The Important Cinema Club, highly recommended. Will has a new book coming out called Ed Wood, Made in Hollywood, USA, which is a serious appraisal of Wood's filmography. No, it doesn't posit that he was actually the greatest filmmaker of all time, but it does make an attempt to put Wood's work into context with regard to what stories he was really trying to tell and keeping in mind the resources he had available to him to tell them. Also, these films are looked at in light of the cultural forces pushing against them at the time, Glen Or Glenda specifically. Alexander Serros is also here. She has a new book out entitled Ida Lupino, Forgotten Auteur. Ida Lupino is a well-known actress. She starred in several classic Hollywood films and many of the great film noirs like High Sierra, They Drive by Night, While the City Sleeps. But she was also a great director. One of the first women directors in Hollywood. One of the first women directors in the Directors Guild. She didn't just direct films, she directed several terrific, important films. Films like The Hitchhiker, Outrage, and The Bigamist. And her story is fascinating. This is in the 1940s. She was obviously incredibly intelligent. So intelligent, in fact, that she knew she had to pretend she was less intelligent than she was. So the men that ran her exclusively all-male field wouldn't feel threatened and prevent her from working. Crazy! Speaking of directors, True Tales from Weirdsville finishes our three-part story on the life and career of Mr. David Lynch, as seen through the prism of his magnum opus, Twin Peaks. This segment is a little bigger than normal this time around, but he warrants it. As for me, June involves a lot of traveling, but it is of the "Dad, carry my stuff" kind. But to keep you sated, you can enjoy my special, Perfectly Normal, on YouTube and iTunes. Additionally, all of the Dr. Z episodes, including our live shows from Dynasty Typewriter, are on Dr. Z's new Vimeo page. Just go to Hanging with Dr. Z, the word hanging, the word with, drz.vhx.tv. Or just go to danagould.com and hit the link, why don't you? In July, things pick up. I will be at the GalaxyCon along with my good friend the Doctor in New Orleans, July 11th, 12th, and 13th. If you are planning on going to Comic-Con, Dr. Z and myself will be performing in San Diego that weekend at the American Comedy Company, Thursday, July 24th through Saturday, July 26th. And then I will be traveling via Comfort Jetliner to Tampa, Florida for Side Splitters, July 31st through August 2nd. If you are a fan of both Dr. Z and True Tales from Weirdsville, you may want to follow me on Substack. Just go to substack.com, search Dana Gould, and subscribe. True Tales from Weirdsville and Hanging with Dr. Z have new text versions. For True Tales, we like to post new pieces and revised segments from the library that I put into written form. And for Dr. Z, it is his written recountings of his showbiz exploits, all on Substack. So give a listen, will ya? Yes, it is a good idea. Thank you very much. For links and details to all this stuff, just visit danagould.com. Lastly, if you like the show and you're not already a member of our Patreon, why don't you consider it? Go to danagould.com and click on the link. We have one level, $5 a month, and you get some stuff. You get some extra audio. You get some extra video. We don't have graduated levels. For $17.50 a month, I'm not going to go to your grandmother's house and give her a home perm. $5 a month, you get some stuff. It's a simple deal for complicated times. And now, it's on to our filthy business.
Tune in, it's a gas. It's the Dana Gould Hour podcast.
The Dana Gould Hour. Free and worth it.
It's a murky, gray, kind of chilly morning high atop the Mulholland Drive view shelf here in sometimes sunny Southern California, here in the former United States. We have a thing it's kind of kicking up. It's called June Gloom. Wherein the summer starts. The beginning of the day has a heavy marine layer, and what you think of as summer weather doesn't really start until about 12 or 1, but you can set your watch by it. It burns off. So although things might be gray now, I have hope for blue skies in the future. My first guest today is somebody when, I look at their IMDb and their career and I think, how do I not know this person? He's an author, a raconteur. He has a really wonderful podcast called The Important Cinema Club. He has a terrific Substack called Will Sloan's Brilliant Thoughts. And he has a new book out called Ed Wood, Made in Hollywood, USA. And we're going to talk about that right now. Will Sloan, thanks for coming on the show.
Dana, it's an honor to be here. I mean, obviously, I admire your work in many disciplines, but particularly knowing that you were Vampira's close friend towards the end of her life. I mean, I don't think any promotional activity I do on this book tour is going to beat talking to you for that reason alone.
It's funny. Whatever I can do, I'm happy to be a part of it. My wife, we were talking about this last night. Literally, my wife thinks that we have a lot of animals. We have a lot of critters, kids. We have one cat, Mary, that just follows me around, hectoring me all day. And my wife is convinced that it's Mila reincarnated in our cat.
Oh man, I can't imagine.
Constantly hectoring me. So let me echo what I imagine your publisher said when you approached them with the idea for this book. Ed Wood, Made in the USA, why now?
That was indeed a question they asked. And by the way, I am fortunate to be publishing with Or Books because about 10 years ago, they published a collection of Ed Wood's short stories called Ed Wood Blood Splatters Quickly, which was kind of my in to them. They were at least Ed Wood curious. But why now? I feel like the time was right to write a critical study of Ed Wood that kind of brought his reputation up to date. You know, there have obviously been certain landmarks in his critical reputation. There's the Golden Turkeys. Right. There's the Tim Burton biopic. But since the Tim Burton biopic, so many movies have been rediscovered. His writings are more widely available. You know, films like Take It Out and Trade, Necromania, The Young Marrieds, say what you want about them. I think they fill in his artistic personality much more. Yeah. And the world has also changed. I mean, I think there are new sort of critical approaches you can take to him. I think it's easier to love and respect him, if that makes sense. So I wanted to write a book that incorporated all that and looked at his career, you know, holistically, looked at it from beginning to end and tried to trace the artistic personality through it. And I mean, he may have been a bad artist, but he was an artist.
I fully agree.
And, the two things is that there are a lot of books you can find about Ed Wood, but, the big one that everyone references is Rudolph Gray's The Nightmare of Ecstasy. But that is not a critical appraisal of his work at all. That is just an oral history of his life and times.
Absolutely.
And
I
it's
mean,
eminently readable. It's a great book, and it was the sort of the Bible that Scott and Larry used to write the script. But this is this book did not exist until you wrote it.
yeah. Exactly. I mean, Nightmare of Ecstasy. I mean, it's maybe the most battered and worn book on my shelf.
Especially mine as well.
Yeah. I mean, I read it over and over again, and especially in writing this book, like it is the Bible of all Ed Wood studies. And, it may, I was going to say it may be unsurpassable as a biographical source. Like the fact that it's so it's so unreliable is sort of central to what's great about it. That's why I think it's unsurpassable. The fact that these people are contradicting each other and it's so sketchy. But yeah, exactly what you were saying.
Rashomon and drag.
Totally. I just felt like respect had to be paid to Ed Wood as an artist, from a critical point of view.
Yeah, well, I was talking about this to Bobcat 2 days ago, we talked off. Bob and I are working on a Ed Wood project that more will be developed as soon as we are baptized into the Baptist Church of Beverly Hills. We get some money.
Yeah,
but
I can't wait.
A great example of how the world has changed is Glen Or Glenda is not funny anymore in the way that it used to be. And the concept of kink shaming did not exist at the time. I mean, the brilliant thing about Glen Or Glenda, when you see it now, is, it was a funny movie that we all saw, and it looked silly. A guy in a dress was funny. But that movie is a plea for tolerance for transvestism from the early 50s, when I believe homosexuality was still illegal.
Totally. And
not
there's
that
a transgender character in it.
Yeah. Not that I'm saying that transvestism and homosexuality are the same thing, but I was just like, as an example of where the culture was, being gay was illegal. And there's a transgender person in it. And this is from the early 50s. That when you see it now is really jaw-dropping. And the fact that because he had footage of smelting.
Yes.
But the fact that two blue-collar factory workers are having this very open-hearted, empathetic conversation about people that are different than they are, it is really something. I'll leave it at that. I don't want to dress it up as something it's not, but it's not nothing.
It's an interesting example of how, the movie can stay the same, but everything around it can change. When it was being shown in the early 1980s, when like Harry and Michael Medved were showing it, and no disrespect to them, because I think they did a lot of, we wouldn't be talking about Ed Wood without them. Yeah. But like a lot of, the fact that the movie is imperfect and the fact that its imperfection is what's great about it, because it's a guy he's trying to express himself. He doesn't quite know what he's saying. He doesn't quite know what he's allowed to say. He's not even entirely honest to himself. And he's just trying to communicate via the medium of a bottom rung exploitation movie that has Bela Lugosi in it. Like all of the internal contradictions of it and the tensions of it, its very imperfection is why I think it's become this sort of beloved document about this pioneering queer text, this pioneering movie about being in the closet. And I've seen it with modern audiences, and it's a roller coaster ride watching it with them, because the movie is very progressive at certain points, and it's also a little bit reactionary at other points, and it's not any one thing. You feel the audience is very sympathetic with it, but there are a lot of times you feel the audience not sure quite what to think.
That's exactly it. And you talking about how time catches up with a movie. I don't think that any other movie like of his is a better example of that. And Scott and Larry have said that when they were writing the biopic, that were they really to do a fully committed dramatic structure, they would have ended with Glen or Glenda, because that was the movie that was his personal statement, but they didn't want to futz with the timeline that much. But yeah, it really is. That's what this guy wanted to say. And you know, we, in researching our project, talked to people that knew him and people that knew the people that knew him. And I guess gender fluid would be the thing. Like his drag persona was a person to him.
I've given this a lot of thought, actually, because, you know, there's an article that he wrote, you know, for one of the many magazines he wrote, and it's included in a collection that Bob Blackburn edited called When the Topic is Sex. It's called An Interview with a Drag Queen, where, you know, he's interviewing a drag queen named Shirley. So, you know, if you know that Shirley was his drag name. So you're reading this interview and it's like, oh, this is him interviewing himself. And it's kind of the Rosetta Stone for how he identified himself. And what I got from that article was his heterosexuality, him being a cisgendered heterosexual man who dressed in drag. That was very important to him. He very much identified as a man, and didn't identify as gay, didn't identify as trans, and those identities were available to him. That said, I'm not quite ready to close the door on all questions of his sexuality yet, because when you read his books, like, he is really obsessed with the idea of passing. He's really obsessed with the idea of, like, a man being mistaken for a woman, and that being erotic.
And I think that it was Glen or Glenda. It was a split. It was a wholly other person. It was a wholly other persona.
And what I also
it's really Lost Highway as a remake of Glen or Glenda.
No, totally. I also have trouble squaring the fact that, you know, everybody who knew him in the 50s, they used to say, oh, he never wore drag on the set. You know, he was very masculine. He had the sweater vest and everything. But when he was working at Pendulum Press in the 70s, he apparently wore an Angora sweater and high heels all the time. Like, he became much more open about it.
Back in the 50s.
Yeah, like he became more and more open about it, and yeah, all of that's interesting. So, you know, you mentioned Scott and Larry and how they structured the screenplay. There's something that they said, one of them said, that was very informative to the book. They, you know, it's what you said. It's that ending the movie with Glen or Glenda would have been triumphant, and like, it makes sense that, like, they end it with the Plan 9 from outer space. It's almost the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood ending that the movie has, where it's like almost a drift into fantasy at the end, because the implication is, well, who wants to watch a movie about a bad artist who failed?
Right.
And that's why it doesn't move past that. And I think if I have any sort of counter to that, with complete respect to Scott and Larry and Tim Burton, it's that actually, when you get into the last 20 years, like, he keeps being an artist, and that's a success in its own right. Like, you read those books, you watch those movies, you know, they may have been made for money, they may have been very compromised and flawed works in a lot of ways, but I kind of think that in some of those later works, he's putting his guts on a slab in a way that he didn't in some of the 50s ones. I think a book like Diary of a Transvestite Hooker is in certain angles more personal than Bride of the Monster is. I mean, it's apples and oranges.
Oh, but, yeah, I completely. I mean, it's very. You have to be a spectacularly cynical hack to not let your personal life bleed into whatever you're writing. You know, I just give you an example. I had an idea about a guy getting sucked into his favorite movie and having to survive in his favorite movie. And I ended up writing it, and it's for an episode of Creep Show, about a guy who invents a machine that it's the ultimate. It's like a first-person game, but you actually you go into the movie that you love. Whatever
virtual reality.
Thank you, VR, ultimate VR, ultimate virtual reality. And this guy goes into this movie, Terror Train, and he ends up having an affair with an actress in Terror Train, and then his wife catches him and rejiggers the machine, and he ends up getting trapped in Night of the Living Dead. And so I pitched that to my friends who works at Creepshow, my friend Greg, and he goes, yeah, do it, write it. And so I just thought it was a really clever idea about a way for us to make up the sets from Night of the Living Dead. It was basically an idea to, what we're going to do? We're going to pretend we're George Romero. We're going to rebuild the sets from Night of the Living Dead. And then I wrote it, and it was completely the story of my divorce. It was completely the story of two people growing estranged in the same house. And it's one of those things that you can't escape.
To what you were saying, like one of his many books, The Only House, there's a whole chapter in that about this old married couple who are quite abusive to each other, but there's also like there's a strange toxic love in the abusive, like the epithets they're hurling at each other. And if you read that right after you've read Nightmare of Ecstasy, it's like, oh, he's working through his own marriage here. This is exactly his marriage to Kathy Wood as it was described in Nightmare of Ecstasy.
Yeah.
And the fact that, I don't know, he held on to all of his paperback novels, he stamped in them like from the personal library of Edward B. Wood Jr. Yeah.
Did you go to Cornell?
Although I did go to at the Boo Hooray Gallery in New York about 10 years ago when they had the exhibit for it. I saw all the work on display there. Bob Blackburn came in and he showed me Edward's little address book that had like Tor Johnson's phone number in it.
It's crazy. In fact, I'll post for the Patreon. It's like Criswell, Tor, just these numbers. It's mind-boggling. They were just, and that is the other thing that we discovered during our research was his friends really loved him, and he seemed a great guy. And that is, I think, one of the reasons one of the reasons I love that world as much as I do is, obviously we see a bit of ourselves in it. And there's that one line that, I don't know, that they just threw in there that really resonates as like, Ed is the only people in town who doesn't judge people. If I did, I wouldn't have any friends. People who love Ed Wood are weirdos. And being a weirdo is it's very inclusive culture.
Well, it's interesting when Plan 9 from Outer Space was crowned the worst movie of all time, and you're kind of putting yourself in the head of the people who voted for it.
Right. And that's an important point I just wanted to interject. The Medved brothers did not proclaim it the worst movie of all time. Harry, I don't know Michael, but I know Harry very well. And it feels horrible that people think that they don't like it. I know,
yeah.
He's like, it was a reader's poll. We just published it.
Yeah. I've met Harry a few times, and I like him a great deal. And I know from talking to him too that it's like you have this trajectory of it where probably if you're like a boomer kid who is watching a lot of Bela Lugosi movies on TV and you see this one without any context, you think, "What the hell is this?" and so of course it seems like the worst movie of all time that played on Los Angeles television in 1965.
Yeah,
but then, and I'm sure the Medveds also had this experience. Like you learn more about it, you learn about the lore. For me, it was this documentary, Flying Saucers Over Hollywood, the Plan 9 companion, which I love so much because it's this. Is
that Mark Carducci? Is that who made that?
That's right, the late Mark Carducci, and it's almost this novel. It's almost about the city of Los Angeles as much as it's about.
It's beautiful. It's a terrific documentary.
And you learn about the lore of all these people. You learn about, the demons inside Ed himself. You learn about Paul Marco and Criswell and the whole gang.
Yep.
I saw Paul Marco's grave when I was in L.A. last, by the way. I don't know. I don't know if you've ever made it out to the very, very edge of Hollywood Forever Cemetery.
Is he at Hollywood Forever?
He is. I mean, I know Vampira's there too. I think you were involved in that.
Yeah, I was. I felt that that's where she should be, and so she was interred there. Yeah, and if you visit her grave at Hollywood Forever, Darren McGavin is right behind her, which I did intentionally because I thought it would be funny if he was chasing a vampire for all eternity. So
that's beautiful.
Yeah.
So that's beautiful, and the fact that Paul Marco is actually at the very edge, like had to walk all the way to the fence.
That's what I go. So yeah, and
this little placard, it says Kelton the Cop Forever on it. So, and I thought this is so beautiful. He made it in Hollywood Forever at the very edge.
Yeah, that's great. And David Lynch is now because they're showing Blue Velvet. The Cinespia shows movies at the Hollywood Forever Cemetery, and it's basically watch Blue Velvet with David. He was interred there recently. And his marker, the quote just says "Night Blooming Jasmine," which was the thing that he loved about Hollywood.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it's quite beautiful. Hollywood Forever is an amazing place, full of cats, full of feral cats.
Oh God, yeah. Whenever I'm in a city, I like to do the graveyard tour.
Mm-hmm.
Hollywood Forever also has a great bust of Burt Reynolds in the middle of it. I highly recommend, if you're in the area, take a picture with the huge Burt Reynolds statue.
The Ramones sort of symbolize the level of culture that kept Ed Wood alive. Punk bands that I grew up with all loved him, and they picked up the banner and kept him alive. And because it's the same attitude. It's like, yeah, we're the weirdos and the misfits. Come over here. Walking down the street with my wife, and somebody had a sweatshirt that said, "You can't sit with us." And I got angry. I was like, that's completely wrong. That shirt should say, "You can sit with us." That's the whole point.
Absolutely.
Yeah, come over here. You can sit with us.
And, I feel like when the Golden Turkey moment was happening, there was almost kind of like a parallel moment. Among like punk musicians who, I know the Misfits loved Vampira. I know that, there was a kind of like CBGB crowd who loved the Ed Wood movies. They would play it at they would play Plan 9 at Club 57, and they would sort of love him, the Lower East Side types would sort of love him as this outsider artist. By the way, I saw you on Harry Medved's show, Location Land. And the last time I was in LA, I kind of did the Ed Wood tour myself. I drove out to the Valley. I saw Tor Johnson's house. I went to Yucca and Cahuenga, and I saw his last apartment.
Don't end the tour at Yucca and Cahuenga. It's a bit of a downer.
No. I ended it outside Gold Diggers. Just as
well played,
a triumphant note to end on. Yeah.
I didn't realize that Gold Diggers was so close to Hollywood Forever. It's just like 2 blocks down.
I know.
Yeah. No, I was stunned when I was there.
And I was telling, all my LA friends, like, oh my God, I saw Gold Diggers, it's like right where they shot Plan 9. They're like, oh yeah, Gold Diggers. I drive past that all the time. It's like, no, you don't understand. History is in your midst.
I know. I wanted to shoot my special at Gold Diggers. I'd just like to say, like, this is where they shot Plan 9 from outer space. It is. And, it's the same thing that Ed Wood loved, and it's this same thing that David Lynch loved. It's like, loved Hollywood, loved the idea of Hollywood. David Lynch was filling out a form with his daughter, who was, I think, 7 at the time, or 8, and it was like Los Angeles. He goes, "No, you don't live in Los Angeles. You live in Hollywood."
That's right.
Yeah.
I love that. Just out of curiosity, like where do you stand on the later Ed Wood stuff? Like, stuff like The Young Marrieds, Necromania, Take It Out in Trade. Do you get any pleasure out of that stuff at all?
I enjoy Night of the Ghouls. I enjoy Orgy of the Dead.
Oh, yeah.
Torture, it pleasures me. I mean, there's a lot of Operation Red Light, which was he did not direct, but he wrote and starred in, and it remains unfinished. But at this point, I put it in a separate bin from what we call the big three. Even though there was more, Glen Or Glenda brought the most of Plan 9, and I know he made others. Also because it's in color, it's just a different era than that sort of mid-century monster movie kind of aesthetic that people love so much. I do enjoy them, but they're less story oriented than you gotta, as they called them at the time, you gotta show the ticket sellers.
Well, speaking of David Lynch, I sort of think his career parallels the structure of Mulholland Drive in a way, where it's like the first half of it is a dream and the second half is reality. It's like you've got this boy who dreamed of being in Hollywood, who grew up in Poughkeepsie. He dreamed of making Bela Lugosi horror movies, and then he makes these kind of facsimiles of the movies that he loved growing up, these dreamscapes, and then he wakes up and he's directing Necromania in the valley somewhere.
I didn't know that John Landis met Ed Wood.
I know. He said that in an interview at one point. John Landis was, I guess, doing a preview screening of Schlock, his first movie.
Right.
And Forrest J. Ackerman came, and Forrest J. Ackerman's date was a shabby, bad-smelling, slightly inebriated gentleman who was Ed Wood. And Landis, to his credit, immediately knew who he was. He was like, "Oh, you're Ed Wood. You made Bride of the Monster."
Right.
And Ed Wood was apparently kind of flabbergasted that Landis knew who he was. And the thought of the two of them meeting, it just feels like worlds colliding, not just different eras, but different classes.
Totally.
Almost,
yeah. It's a tribute to John that John doesn't make that distinction.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, you made a movie, I made a movie. And for people that badmouth Ed and thus and such, I always go to yes, everything you say might be true. How many movies have you gotten made?
This is why, I find Glen Or Glenda
easy.
Glen Or Glenda is more enjoyable to watch with an audience than Plan 9 from Outer Spaces, because Plan 9 sort of invites the ironic reaction. And I'm going to sound like a fuddy-duddy by saying this because obviously it's funny, the tombstone falls over, the flying saucer on the string. Obviously you laugh at it. And I don't know what the line is, but there's always a moment where I kind of think all right, you frickin' Tom Servos over here. I don't see you making a movie that we're still watching 70 years later.
Yeah. Well, there's the theory, and this is brought up in the Plan 9 companion. And I don't know who says it. It might be Mark, where that Ed Wood, you can look at it almost as a surrealist would and say, if I had enough money for special effects, this is an approximation of what it would look like.
Yeah, it's symbolic of the special effect that he would have.
Which is interesting in that, and I hasten to draw the analogy again, in Twin Peaks: The Return, there are very clumsy effects that could have been better that aren't, like Laura taking her face off and things like that. And then there are effects that are gobsmacking. Like the whole episode 8 is just the episode 8 of Twin Peaks: The Return is one of the best films of that year.
Totally.
And I don't know if that was budgetary or intentional. Now we don't need that to be that good.
It's interesting, like Plan 9 from Outer Space. I've probably seen it 20 or 30 times in my life. And after the first 4 or 5 times, you stop laughing at the string on the flying saucer.
Yeah.
Because I think he kind of accidentally or otherwise, he does create a dreamlike reality in that movie. The cemetery set, you're obviously aware that it's it looks fake, but because it's this impossible space, because the black backdrop at a certain point just becomes a backdrop, and you kind of don't know where you are in this cemetery. Like, you're lost in this cemetery, and that creates a dreamlike mood. You know, whether it's the one he wanted or not, it's powerful.
Yeah, I agree, and it's also just the language of film. The cab ride with Bruce Willis in Pulp Fiction. I mean, that is a screamingly obvious green screen, probably blue screen at that time. But I think it was his homage to Detour, but who knows what it was. But it's like, there's no way he saw that and went, great, a photorealistic cab ride, put it in the movie. And Detour is another example of, you create whatever reality the movie requires.
Low-key, one of my favorite scenes in the Ed Wood movie is when, you know, Johnny Depp's on the Bride of the Monster set, and he's like, all right, I want this here, and I want one of those electrical things that buzzes. because he's sort of creating like the dream of a Hollywood set. And I think if you look at all of his movies that way, they also become very charming, because in Plan 9, the scene at the Pentagon at Lyle Talbot's office, if you just like study what his office looks like, it's like, okay, what would a Pentagon guy have? All right, he's got maybe a map on the wall, maybe a map. He's got, I don't know, maybe a globe also. Yeah. Well, this guy is interested in outer space stuff. So can we have some like models of little spaceships and stuff on his desk? What he's doing with those, I don't know. And yeah, every set, like, you know, a challenge of writing about Ed Wood is like, it is hard to get around the fact sometimes that like a lot of this stuff is bad. Or he is a little tasteless, or like things don't work, you know, like the Pentagon guy has this office that, if you stop to think about it for a second, like makes no sense. So, and so, you know,
the other thing is they've established in the dialogue that if you are in the Air Force and you announce that flying saucers are real, you could get court-martialed. But they also have a Department of Saucer Activity.
Yes.
Well, you really have to pick one.
Well, because like Plan 9 is so derivative, you know, he knows that in a movie like this, you have a scene where the flying saucers are over Hollywood and everyone's pointing at them. But he also knows that you should have a scene where the generals are like, oh, well, it's all deeply classified. Nobody's talking about this. Nobody can acknowledge this. The saucers are in the middle of Los Angeles.
Yeah, like, yes. You have a Department of Saucer Field Activity. Then what do you mean I can't tell you about flying saucers?
Yeah. And then if you want to get really galaxy brained about it, you can say, oh, well, Ed's actually making a really subversive commentary about the government here, where things are just going to happen in front of you, and the government will say they're not happening. If you want to do like a really like wild kind of left-wing critique of the films, and you know, maybe that's valid. Who knows?
I am sure you could do that and make it track out. And I am also sure that was not his intention, but that doesn't negate it.
Yes.
You know, and that's the whole thing. It's like, I don't know, what's this movie to you? There you go. Yeah. Are you going to then turn around and tell me that that's not it? You know, that's all art. It's like, I don't know, what's this pain? That's why I'm not going to tell you. What's this pain to you?
And the fact that Ed like wasn't interviewed that much in his life, I mean, there are a few interviews with him, but they tend to be mostly focused on Lugosi. You know, he has this book, Hollywood Rat Race,
right? Which,
you know, is a wonderful book, has much to recommend in it, but there's not a lot of, you know, testimony of him talking about his authorial intentions. And that, as much as I would love to have that, it makes all of this work it adds just a little bit more mystery to all of it,
sure.
Which can be productive, I think.
Well, where do you stand on the later films, on the what people say, like at the end of the biopic, it says after a descent into nudie films, do you consider it his descent, or is it just where the net, you know, clearly he didn't become a mainstream director.
Yeah, he didn't become Orson Welles. I mean,
kind of in a way he did. That's
yeah.
They
Well,
were
I mean,
both, they
you
were
look
both
at,
running
like-
around scraping for dough.
That's true. That's true. You look at the 8mm like porn loops he was making, and it's like, I don't know, this stuff isn't very good. But then you can also say, well, you know, he still had his megaphone and he still had his camera. He was still directing.
He made movies.
Some of the later stuff, yeah, like I think Take It Out and Trade is kind of good, honestly. I think it's really funny. I think it makes his use of color, his use of like Los Angeles locations are all very interesting. I think it has a really nice spirit to it. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's as good as, Russ Meyer's movies, but it's better than a lot of sexploitation movies.
He always, and in his, as you said, like even in the books, he stamped them. He always did try to tell a story. It wasn't just gratuitous. So even Orgy of the Dead, which is, there's a story. What I'm saying is like, he tried to put it into a dramaturgical context. He wanted there to be a reason for it. Now, it's ridiculous. And I love the fact that Orgy of the Dead apparently had a novelization.
Man, I hope it fills in the lore.
I've held it because we went to the Ed Wood Library at Cornell and I've seen the book. I've held it in my hand.
I haven't read that one, but his book, The Only House, is a novelization of Necromania, and it greatly expands the lore of the film. So if you're a real sicko and you want to know like the backstory of the characters in that book, he was thinking about it. But I do even like, I like
that would
the
be a
young
great
married
business card. Dana Gould, real sicko.
Yeah. I like Necromania and The Young Marrieds because I do think they continue the preoccupations that he had from the beginning of his career. They're both very much movies about like performing masculinity and performing femininity.
Yep.
Like I also just like seeing the echoes of things that he likes, things that he used to like, the little touches of Necromania, the haunted house atmosphere of it.
Now,
atmosphere might be too strong a word.
For those people who are listening that have not seen or are familiar with Necromania, give us a what's the elevator pitch? You're pitching me Necromania.
Necromania is a hardcore pornographic film. It's not quite an hour long, so you can watch it on your lunch hour, preferably at your cubicle at work.
Preferably not while you're eating.
Yeah. It's about a couple who they're what might have been called at the time a frigid couple. They're having some trouble in a certain area of their marriage. And so they come to
call that
Madam,
the bathing suit area.
Yeah, that's right. They come to Madam Heales's sanitarium, which is also a haunted house. As they go in, the man says, "Any minute, I expect Bela Lugosi to pop out of one of these doors," and I like that. And it ends. They go off on their own, and they have various sexual misadventures that sort of light the spark underneath them again. And it ends with a sex scene in a coffin that was apparently owned by Criswell in real life.
Yes, he did have a coffin.
The Young Marrieds, like that's a harder one. It doesn't have the supernatural elements that people like in Ed Wood movies, but it does end on this ambiguously queer note that, if you're writing your book on Ed Wood, can have you calling back to lots of other things that he did in his career. I don't know if I can recommend these movies to people who aren't complete psychopaths, but if you are, if you've gone down the rabbit hole this far, they may become some of your favorite Ed Wood movies as they are with me.
Yeah. Well, your description of Necromania right out of the gate is he did have an idea for a story.
Oh yeah.
This happens and this happens and this happens. And that's all a story is.
And there's a scene in The Young Marrieds where it's stock footage of a striptease act, and you hear these two characters debating like the swinging lifestyle over it, and it kind of echoes back to the scene in Glen or Glenda with the guys at the steel mill. Yeah, seeing these tropes and devices that he's using recur throughout his career is very powerful to me. Or like in Bride and the Beast, which is his ambiguously pro-bestiality movie that he wrote in the 1950s, it ends with that great scene of the gorilla carrying his human bride off into the wilderness. And, it cuts to the husband and he's being comforted by his friend. It's like, well, she's gone back to nature where she belongs. Well, 15 years later in 1 Million AC/DC, he repeats the same image of a gorilla carrying a woman away. And it's like, what does that mean? Like,
yeah. Well, that's also. I think
this is
King Kong is also very symbolic of that. It's Beauty and the Beast.
Oh yeah, he mentions King Kong over and over again in his films and his writings. In The Love Feast, he has that legendary line, "You make me feel like King Kong." And once you start watching and reading all of this stuff in close proximity, you get a very good sense of his brain and all the little pleasure centers in it, and these reference points that call back to other things.
Have you ever? I'm sure you're aware of this. And I say this to anyone, if you've just got some time to kill, get on Google or the search engine of your choice, DuckDuckGo, and just put in 2 words. Bigfoot erotica. Go.
Took the words right out of my mouth.
But this is a trope. This is a common trope. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not ready to completely diagnose him on that, but this is one of the many things I explore in the book. His interest in the animal nature, as I think he called it in Glen Or Glenda.
Wow. One thing that you have to factor in to his story, especially in the later years, the second half, I guess you could say, is his alcoholism. Like, this is a guy that was handicapped, worked with a self-inflicted handicap of being brutally addicted to alcohol. And Lord knows what he would have achieved were he not basically a slave to his addiction for the last 20, 30 years of his life.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's an unambiguously tragic thing. I don't get the sense that he ever had, much of a business sense. He wasn't one of those directors like, I don't know, Herschel Gordon Lewis or Russ Meyer, who was a natural entrepreneur in addition to being an artist.
Right.
But probably he would have been taken more seriously had he not had that debilitating addiction. You read interviews with anybody who was around at the time. I think Stephen Apostoloff said words to the effect of, I loved Eddie, but the booze killed him.
Right.
He just became unreliable. It's what lost him his job. He made a lot of he worked for Apostoloff a lot. Yeah, and those movies aren't my favorite. I love Orgy of the Dead. There's a kind of sourness.
Class Reunion is one.
Yeah, Class Reunion, the Beach Bunnies, the Snow Bunnies. I mean,
right.
I find them a little less rich. I find Apostoloff a much worse filmmaker than Ed Wood, to be honest.
Well, Apostoloff is exactly the opposite of what it is. Like, it was purely what's the word I'm looking for? Exploitation. It was just like, get them out there. Get the boobs on camera. I don't care how.
Absolutely. And anything that's interesting about them, I think it's when you see like Ed Wood's preoccupations come up in them. There's also, I find, a sourness in Apostoloff's movies because, he was an arch conservative. He was he fled, I guess, communist Bulgaria and was an arch anti-communist, which I think leads to a reactionary streak in some of those movies that, for me at least, strikes a more sour note than, something like Glen Or Glenda, which is a little bit more searching.
Well, especially at the time they were made in the late 60s, early 70s, which was the height of the counterculture, and arch conservatives were really threatened by the counterculture. So you would think that the people to whom that they would be aligned, because they're misfits and weirdos, would be their heroes, when actually it's like, if is it the student nurses?
Right.
It's like, that is, it's like a dragnet. The evil hippies are coming to despoil your culture.
Right. And Fugitive Girls, which is probably the second best Ed Wood, Stephen Apostoloff movie after Orgy of the Dead. It's got some it's got some kind of funny scenes with some like hippy dippy characters in
Right.
it. But you could tell that Wood and Apostoloff are kind of uniting on behalf of the greatest generation against the young hippies. Whereas I think if you compare that to Take It Out in Trade, which has this much more, what's the word I'm looking for? Ecumenical view of society. It's got this transgender couple in it. It's a movie that's kind of more on the side of the weirdos and the freaks.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's no comparison.
I remember as a kid, Forrest Ackerman penned a anti-flag burning editorial and put it on the back of Famous Monsters because this was
spookiest article ever.
Yeah, but it was like, it was 1972. It was people who protesting the Vietnam War, and he was infuriated by it because these guys were, the World War II generation. They put on a dress and get shit faced, but you're not gonna despoil Old Glory.
Yeah, and this is an interesting thing in Ed Wood's career where I do think his politics are a little bit adaptable to his assignment. There are some things when you get
everyone
into
on Fox.
Yeah. When you get really into the weeds of the Ed Wood Apocrypha, if you're watching a movie like, and I don't recommend this, but if you're watching a movie like The Undergraduate, which he wrote, which is a straight up white coater, faux sex education film that he wrote, that's a very kind of like
after The Graduate as a
I would say so. I would say the title
clever title.
Yeah, The Undergraduate. That's a movie that's a little bit like, free love, man, do what you want, which is not quite what he's doing in the Stephen Apostoloff movies, nor what he's doing in The Sinister Urge, which is a straight up like, puritanical sexploitation film.
Yeah, it's funny how it almost goes full circle, as it often does. Like, so what to you is the transition movie? Would Orgy of the Dead be the transition movie where you still have a little bit of the old Ed Wood, still got Criswell in the coffin, he got a werewolf, and then by the end of that movie, he's into the second phase of his work?
Yeah, definitely. The transition period of Night of the Ghouls, which kind of feels like a fire sale at the Ed Wood factory. It's got this huge amount of footage, repurposed footage from other projects that didn't go anywhere. It's got these characters from the other movies like Lobo and
Tom Mason is in Night of the Ghouls, I believe.
Yeah, he's an associate producer on it, which means you get to actually see his face in this one. Kelton the Cop is in it in a huge role because he's also an associate producer on it. Sure. So he gets a greatly expanded role.
And there's a character of Lobo, but it's not Tor Johnson.
Tor Johnson is in it.
It isn't. But I'm thinking of Orgy of the Dead. He is in Night of the Ghouls. Yes.
That's right.
Again, Tarantino, these characters are all in the same universe. Red Apple cigarettes are in there.
Yeah, exactly. Night of the Ghouls just feels like the last garage sale before it all closes. And then the Sinister Urge is this first like dip into the world of sexploitation. And I mean, this is definitely reading too deep into it, but it opens with like a young girl who's fresh off the bus in Hollywood, who wants to be a star, who gets killed by this sinister smut racket, and her name is Shirley. And I would love to think that on subconscious level, Ed Wood was thinking about his own eventual descent into pornography by doing this. Like he was once, a bright-eyed idealist from Poughkeepsie, New York, who was fresh off the bus in Hollywood and wanted to make monster movies. And now here he is getting swallowed up into the world of sin and vice.
He really is Naomi Watts.
Yeah, exactly.
To continue that analogy, it's like that scene in Inland Empire where they're doing the table read on the soundstage, and there's somebody in the back of the soundstage, so he goes to see who it is, and it's Laura Dern from later in the movie.
Yes. And so, if you pretend that Shirley, all the Shirleys who appear in these movies are just the same character, it's almost like Ed's tour through Hollywood.
Yeah, no, that is. But again, I don't see how that wouldn't be true in the sense of him just unconsciously writing what he knows.
Yeah.
That's what you do. You write. I mean, you write what you know. You write your reality.
And I mean, The Sinister Urge also has that character that Carl Anthony plays. I think the character's name is Johnny Ride, who is a filmmaker who's stuck in a rut in the smut picture racket. He used to make good movies, and his office is covered with posters of Plan 9 from Outer Space, Jailbait, Bride of the Monster, The Violent Years, posters of all the Ed Wood movies that, it's implied that he made before he descended to this to this smut racket. So to answer your question from a little while ago, I think The Sinister Urge,
in terms of Jailbait, did Ed Wood also direct Jailbait, or did he just write it?
He directed Jailbait. He only wrote The Violent Years. The Violent Years. Violent Years and Bride and the Beast are the two that he wrote in the 50s that I think are kind of the strongest, like the ones that have the most personality of him.
And which one is Dick Contino in?
That would be, that's The Sinister Urge. Where he plays the kind of the deranged rapist who's driven crazy by the smut pictures.
Right. And Ed directed The Sinister Urge?
That's right. Yeah.
Right.
And he directed The Sinister Urge because he had this huge amount of footage for some juvenile delinquency project that he wanted to make called Hellborn. And he was able to say, look, I've got 20 minutes of footage here. All I need to make is another 40 minutes.
Right.
Bam, you got a movie.
And I believe Dick Contino had a weird real life thing. Let's find out.
I want to believe he did.
I know that James Ellroy wrote a short story called Dick Contino's Blues.
Oh my God. I'm sorry. I'm learning that for the first time. That's amazing. I know that Dick Contino, he showed up to the, or hang on, let me,
I'm looking it up and we'll cut all this, but Dick Contino's Blues is a great James Ellroy short.
Oh, Dino Fantini is his name.
His real name.
Yeah. And, I lose a little bit of track of what happened to Dino Fantini. I know that he showed up to the premiere of The Haunted World of Ed Wood in the 90s. So he was semi-visible as late as then.
Okay.
I don't know if he's still alive. Maybe not.
So this is from Wikipedia, so you know it's true. James Ellroy wrote a novella, Dick Contino's Blues, which is a mini-memoir and crime story based on Contino's experiences as a struggling artist after the war. It is included in the 1994 Ellroy short story collection Hollywood Nocturnes, which I highly recommend. A version appeared in issue number 46 of Granta magazine. Oh, it was in Granta, along with several photographs of Contino and the author. Ellroy also penned a short story entitled Hollywood Shakedown, which appeared in his collected work Crime Wave, which features Contino as the central character. I think I'm conflating Hollywood Shakedown with reality. All stories are fictitious. He also appears in an American tabloid. James Ellroy's obsessed with Dick Contino, but I don't think Dick Contino did anything more untoward in his real life than be friends with James Ellroy. But more power to him. But that's that whole, to me, the element of the latter Ed Wood period. There is something about 48 to 63, that period, Ed Wood's heyday, the heyday of the world that James Ellroy writes about, where, America was on the ascendant, astride the world after the war as an economic superpower, and was on paper all about truth, justice, and the American way. Peer under the surface, and it's filled with rats. It's all horseshit. That's such a rich ferment, and that's the world that Ed lived in. That's the world that James Ellroy lived in. That's the world that David Lynch lived in. I mean, Blue Velvet and all those worlds are in this sort of weird neo-50s America. If you look at the way the high school kids in Twin Peaks dress, they don't dress like it's 1991. They dress like it's 1957.
And this is why Glen or Glenda, I think, is so powerful, because when you watch that movie with an audience now, the scene at the end where the narrator basically says, "Oh, don't worry, Glenn's given up his cross-dressing. He's found his sister, his wife, his everything he needs, and his beautiful wife Barbara." And it ends with the two of them, like, this quintessential '50s couple. You watch it with an audience, and the audience doesn't quite know what to do with that. I think that feels like the ending of Blue Velvet. I think it has this like oddly unsettling quality, even if he didn't intend it that way,
Yeah, it's like, that's not true.
Exactly, yeah. And because you also know who made it. Like,
right.
He didn't give up his cross-dressing.
Yeah. And and the whole point of the movie is that he shouldn't have to.
Yes, exactly.
Just thinking about it because of where this conversation went. Denise Bryson, in David Duchovny's character in Twin Peaks, was in 1991 a transgender character, but was an FBI agent that just happened to be transgender.
Yeah.
That was the only, and yeah, people laughed, but the character was played straight, so ahead of its time. There's a scene where Sherilyn Fenn sees Denise Bryson and she's astounded. And you think he introduces her as an FBI agent, and Sherilyn Fenn's jaw drops, and you think she's going to say, "You're a guy." Mm-hmm. And she says, "They have female FBI agents?"
Yeah, yeah.
And then when he comes back in the return, it is to Denise Bryson that Gordon Cole says, "I told him, fix your hearts or die," which is the sort of one of his big, a lot of T-shirts say that. So like, it is funny that weird, that sort of way, way, way ahead of its time plea for tolerance.
I've thought of, I've obviously thought a lot of Ed Wood in relation to David Lynch. And I think I could stand to think about it a little more, because the fact that the two of them, had an interest and an empathy for people, for transgender people at a time when they were marginalized, shall we say, that's, I think, consistent with both of their interests. And God, I'm not even sure what words I would use, but they're not just interested in the way things are supposed to be.
Yeah, that's well put.
They're interested to whole other realms of possibility. I don't know if Ed Wood himself practiced transcendental meditation. Probably not, but he seems tapped into the reality. Same. Like, yeah. He seems tapped into the similar ways of thinking.
He is, and both men were killed by their addictions. Ed Wood, booze, and David Lynch, cigarettes. David Lynch knows. You look at Blue Velvet, that the American dream is a dream, and that you look, look in the grass and you'll see a bunch of bugs and a human ear. I think Ed Wood did believe it and aspired to it, or maybe that
Absolutely.
was just being a product of his time. People weren't ready to admit it was horseshit yet.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think he did believe it. But he also had other feelings that he probably wasn't able to, he didn't have the tools to articulate. When Criswell talks about entering a world between the living and the dead, that's kind of the same world that Lynch likes to travel in.
Here's the inescapable fact. We're still talking about him. Mm-hmm. And like you were talking about, you talk about David Lynch, like, he's obviously a much bigger cultural force.
Oh yeah.
But Inland Empire, so like we're still talking about Inland Empire.
Yeah,
a film that many people say doesn't work. The weird thing about him specifically is he became, like, every day you would go in and check in with David Lynch, but because the world was ending and you didn't know what was going on, but Blue Skies and Golden Sunshine, it lifted your spirits. And I don't think
Beautifully
people will understand how much that meant to people. And it also was like, yeah, we can still be weird. And that's why when he passed, it was such a gut punch, because it was the timing with the election and the results, the fires. And then it was like, well, the world can't get any worse. Hang on. We have one more. It was like Bowie dying in 2016. And it was like, oh, things can't get worse. Wait a minute. We have one. We got one. What if we did this?
It's funny. Lynch dying, and I think when Trump was elected the first time, I think Leonard Cohen died maybe 5 days after.
Yeah, and Bowie.
I remember thinking,
and Bowie.
Yeah, and I remember thinking, like, well, like that sucks, but I'm glad to be thinking about something that's not Trump. I'm glad to be thinking about Leonard Cohen, which is something that I like.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But it's also important in that this, the spirit, it doesn't change who you are.
Yeah.
It doesn't change who you are. And really what all of this work boils down to with both of these guys and everybody else and all the music we like, and the Ramones and the Cramps, whoever, Leonard Cohen, Mr. Rogers. It's, you're great. Like what you like, make what you want to make, and you can sit with us. I mean, that's the
right,
through line that connects all of these people. And that's why I think people hold them so close,
Yeah.
I know when the Bob's Big Boy that he used to visit in Burbank became an impromptu shrine in January, and people would go and put stuff on the Bob's Big Boy statue. And, I went down and yeah, it was just everybody was just standing there. And it was and the city was on fire. But it was very important.
Well, yeah, like David Lynch, I guess another thing he has in common with Ed Wood is, and again, I think Lynch was probably more self-aware about this than Wood was, but there is a sort of rejection of certain hierarchies in his life and career. Lynch obviously didn't distinguish between different art forms. It was all this huge rush of creativity for him. He also didn't distinguish, like the cast of Twin Peaks: The Return is sort of similar to the cast of Plan 9 from Outer Space.
Yes.
And it's all these people from different walks of life. Frankly, Lost Highway is like this too, where it's Bill Pullman, Patricia Arquette. It's also Richard Pryor. It's also Robert Blake. It's the guy from The Crow. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting his name.
I know you're talking about the guy with the forehead.
I hate to have to call him that.
Yeah. He was the guy that fired the gun.
I know, and that's a horrible, thing to have to live with. So I hate to refer to him that way, but it's like people like that. His movies have that same spirit, and there's obviously a lot of darkness in Lynch's movies, just as there is in some of Ed Wood's work. But there's also a lot of lightness and a lot of that ecumenical spirit.
Yeah, well put. Now more than ever, because they can't. That's the one thing they can't legislate away.
Yeah.
So for people that want to keep up to date, you can get the best place to get the book is at orbooks.com.
That's correct.
Pre-order it, get it in your bookstores.
That's right. And it'll start shipping from Or Books in June, July, and then I think it'll be in bookstores around the time of Ed's birthday in October. So if you want it early, get it from the publisher.
Yeah, order from the publisher. And the more pre-orders the publisher gets, the more it helps getting it into stores. So
you got it.
You're doing yourself a favor by getting the book, and you're doing Will a favor by getting it into stores. And your Substack is called Will Sloan's Brilliant Thoughts.
Yeah, and I hope I can live up to that name.
I think you do. And the podcast is called and that's the Important Cinema Club. That's still going.
That's right. With my friend Justin DeClue. We have an episode every week. It's a film history podcast, encompasses, everything from the silent era to now. Yeah. And I hope you folks will join us
every week. That's madness.
I know.
I do one 7-hour podcast every month and a half. And are you working on a new book? What else is what's in the Sloan hopper? What fish are in your creel?
Yeah. This is going to be the age of Will. I definitely hope to have more books. I hope many more books. I do have some projects that I'm weighing, but right now I'm also very focused on trying to promote this one. So I don't know. We'll see. So far, the current project is this book officially.
Oh, okay, but you're not working on. You're not already delving into your Al Adamson.
Yeah. The problem with writing a book is like you really have to. Writing a book is like living in a house, so you have to be very careful about you don't get a house that has some like leaky roofs and the walls aren't in good condition. So you have to be very careful about what you're willing to immerse a lot of time with. Thankfully, Ed Wood is a great house to live in, and I hope whichever one the next one is will be just as comfortable.
That's well put. That's well put. Will Sloan, ladies and gentlemen.
And now, before the next show starts, let's enjoy an intermission. You'll find our snack bar chock full of good things to eat and drink. Tasty, tempting hot dogs, thirst-quenching soft drinks, fresh, crunchy popcorn, a complete assortment of delicious candy, and a full line of cigarettes. You've plenty of time, so visit the snack bar now. A tasty treat will double your enjoyment of the show.
Like good food? Fast service? Try Bob's, home of the Big Boy Hamburger. Dinner ready? Tired of cooking? Try Bob's, home of the Big Boy Hamburger. Pack a lunch? Try Bob's, home of the Big Boy Hamburger. Like comic books? They're free at Bob's. Food's good, too.
Now listen, now listen, now listen. They're true tales from Weirdsville, tales from Weirdsville, and they're true.
Can your heart stand the shocking facts?
On the very early morning of June 13th, 1994, just 10 minutes after midnight, a man heard a dog barking incessantly somewhere down the street from his home on Bundy Drive in Brentwood, California. Brentwood is a very quiet, very secluded, very expensive residential area just northwest of Beverly Hills, where luxury cars line quiet streets full of giant houses. The man walked outside to investigate and found the barking dog, an Akita, which is like a husky. The dog was wandering down the middle of the street. Its paws were covered in blood. The neighbor followed the bloody paw prints back to a nearby house where he saw a human body lying in a puddle of said blood on the front walk. There was another body lying just a few feet away. The police were called to the scene and the bodies were identified. One was a waiter from the nearby Mezzaluna restaurant, a 25-year-old kid named Ron Goldman. The other was the owner of the house, 35-year-old Nicole Brown Simpson, the ex-wife of celebrity football star O.J. Simpson. The police called Simpson, who had just arrived in Chicago for a corporate event, having flown there earlier that evening, and informed him that his ex-wife was dead. O.J. sounded stunned. Nicole is dead? Oh my God, Nicole is dead? Amidst all the shock and the stunned silence and the repeating over and over, Nicole is dead, there was one thing that Simpson did not say. At no point in the call did he ask, "What happened?" O.J. Simpson's subsequent arrest, Bronco chase, and trial was the story of 1994 and 1995. Everyone was glued to their TV set. Film director David Lynch was no exception. Now, only a few years earlier, in the summer of 1990, when his TV series Twin Peaks dominated the pop culture landscape and his film Wild at Heart had won the Palme d'Or at Cannes, Lynch was one of the biggest stories. He was a man of his time. The 80s had ended, and the first George Bush presidency from 89 to 93 saw a souring of the economy, a war in Kuwait, and the start of the virulent left-right political divide that has since come to define our culture. Everybody knew that we weren't all that we said we were to ourselves, and David Lynch's dark vision was just what the doctor ordered. But that brief window of time did not stay open long. By 1992, when the TV series theatrical spin-off Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me was released, Lynch's unique tone and storytelling style seemed to many like an overused, tired shtick. He must have had whiplash. And so, he retreated. Although still maintaining his home in Los Angeles, Lynch and his partner, Mary Sweeney, with their newborn son in tow, bought a house on Lake Mendota in Wisconsin. Although he never stopped working, he continued to paint, design furniture, and direct the odd commercial now and again. But for the most part, he stayed clear of the limelight and recharged his batteries. To use his own phrase, he went fishing for ideas. And watching the trial of O.J. Simpson, he hooked one. What fascinated Lynch was O.J. Simpson's behavior. Lynch, like most people, believed that O.J. was guilty. There was never a credible alternate theory of the case, unless, as Bob Odenkirk said at the time, you believed in drug dealers on jetpacks with machetes for hands. Upon his acquittal, O.J. shrugged, smirked, and went back to golfing. Lynch began to wonder what kind of mental calisthenics would allow one to achieve such a state. It was as if Simpson had convinced himself of his own innocence. Because he could never conceive of doing what he did, it had to have been some other person entirely. Lynch married that idea with another one that he'd been toying with, one that, supposedly, he came up with on set during the very last day of shooting on Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me. The idea of a couple waking up and finding a videotape on their front step. And when they play the tape, it's a video of them. Lynch called Barry Gifford, who had written the novel Wild at Heart, and the two men, after a little back and forthing, wrote the script for a heady, atmospheric film noir that took its title from a line in Gifford's book, Night Creatures, Lost Highway. Now that's all well and good, but let's remember, Lynch was cold fish in Hollywood at this time. Re-enter the French. Lost Highway, like Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me, was made in America with French funding. The story is set in Los Angeles, but it's David Lynch's Los Angeles, a goth-tinged, quasi-mid-century Los Angeles where girls who look like Betty Page and guys who dress like Fonzie dance to Nine Inch Nails and Marilyn Manson. Released in 1997, it was Lynch's first film in 5 years. The reviews were mixed. It was praised and dissed with equal fervor, but it was not in any way run through the critical grinder that Fire Walk With Me was. Its soundtrack, heavy with Nine Inch Nails, goth and industrial tracks, was an unqualified hit. Indeed, kids who would have otherwise never heard of David Lynch or his movie bought the soundtrack and discovered both. Lynch's collaboration with Trent Reznor put both men on the cover of Rolling Stone, with Reznor front and center and Lynch lurking impishly over his shoulder. The magazine's reviewer gushed over the film, claiming, somewhat over-enthusiastically, that it was Lynch's best film to date. What Lost Highway was the first salvo in a new phase of Lynch's career and creativity. One in which he embraced a wholly new and different approach to storytelling. It was, no doubt, unapologetically challenging. David Foster Wallace wrote a now famous piece on Lynch in Premiere magazine that was published prior to the film's release. There was a lot of buzz around it being his first movie in half a decade. In the piece, Wallace questioned whether Lynch, and I quote, gives a shit whether his reputation is rehabilitated or not. This attitude, like Lynch himself, like his work, seems grandly admirable and sort of nuts. Indeed, when Siskel and Ebert both panned the film, Ebert maintaining a streak of not liking any Lynch movie since Eraserhead, he had the Lost Highway poster amended to include the tagline, 2 thumbs down, 2 more great reasons to see Lost Highway. And as someone who saw that poster at the time, I can assure you it did make you want to see it. Author Martha Nachemson has written 2 books about Lynch, The Passion of David Lynch, which covers everything up to Fire Walk with Me, and David Lynch Swerves, where, informed by long conversations with the director, she examines everything from Lost Highway onward, a period in which, as the title suggests, Lynch began approaching his film work from a new direction. This combined his spiritual beliefs. Lynch was a dedicated vocal proponent of transcendental meditation, his attitudes towards modern society as laid out in the ancient Hindu Holy Vedas, which speaks of reality as a multi-tiered crudité of perception and potential experience, with a dash of quantum mechanics and the unified field theory thrown in for good measure. It is a mouthful, to be sure, but if you chew on it long enough, you can get it down, and you will begin to see that there was a method to the madness. Let's start with the practice of transcendental meditation. TM, which I practice, allows one to transcend to a different level of consciousness, a place Lynch described in his book on TM and the creative process, Catching the Big Fish, as an ocean of creativity. In its simplest explanation, TM allows you to enter a dream state even though you're not asleep. Lynch employed this, we'll call it dream logic, into everything he did from Lost Highway on. In Lost Highway, jazz saxophonist Fred Madison, played by Bill Pullman, living in a dark house and trapped in a dying marriage, gets a message on his front door intercom telling him that Dick Laurent is dead. Only Fred doesn't know who Dick Laurent is. Then he and his wife, played by Patricia Arquette, begin receiving videotapes at their front door. The tapes contain footage of their house and later of themselves asleep inside their house. Later, at a party, Fred is confronted by a mysterious man. The character's name is Mystery Man, played by Robert Blake.
We've met before, haven't we? I don't think so. Where was it you think we met? At your house, don't you remember? No, I don't. Are you sure? Of course. As a matter of fact, I'm there right now.
Eventually, Fred wakes up in prison, having learned that he has murdered his wife, although he has no memory of it. But before Fred can go to the electric chair, there's a problem. The guard checking on Fred's cell discovers one morning that Fred isn't there. In his place is a young auto mechanic named Pete Dayton, played by Balthazar Getty. Well, Pete can't go to the electric chair on Fred's behalf, so out he goes. This is Lynch's take on O.J. Simpson's personality displacement, which is called a psychogenic fugue, made literal. Fred, like O.J., does not believe he could have murdered his own wife, so it must have been someone else. But since he actually did murder his wife, he therefore has to become someone else to continue existing. But wherever you go, there you are. Poor Pete Dayton has his own problems. With a nod to Double Indemnity, The Postman Always Rings Twice, and a fistful of other classic noirs, Pete is having a torrid affair with Alice Wakefield, also played by Patricia Arquette, but a different character than Fred Madison's doomed wife. Or is she? Alice Wakefield is involved with a gangster and porn producer named Mr. Eddie, played by Robert Loggia. And before long, Alice has poor, dumb Pete Dayton involved in a scheme to whack Mr. Eddie and get him out of their lives. And his as well, I guess. Duality being the theme of the film, we then find out that Mr. Eddie is also someone else. He goes by another name, Dick Laurent. But before Pete can whack Mr. Eddie / Dick Laurent, he transforms back into Fred Madison. Why? Well, look when it happens. Just as poor Pete Dayton has decided to commit a murder. Fred's attempt to escape his murderous self has failed. He cannot get away from who he is. After he kills Dick Laurent, he watches him die and is then joined by Robert Blake's mystery man, who it seems was an agent of Fred's all along. Madison then has to get the hell out of Dodge, but on his way out of town, he makes a stop. He swings by his house and leaves a message on the intercom. Dick Laurent is dead. His message is heard by him from earlier in the story. Time is a flat circle, and Fred is here to tell Fred that he's a killer, which is bad news for Fred's wife. The film ends with Fred Madison screaming into the black night as he roars across the desert, a line of police cars in hot pursuit. Wherever he goes, whoever he becomes, he can't escape. Fun fact: the film's Robert Blake was later put on trial for killing his own wife. He was exonerated. It also features music by Marilyn Manson, who is accused of doing everything but killing Robert Blake's wife. Although Blake was lauded for his chilling performance, I used to see him at our Whole Foods, and I can assure you he wasn't acting. What you see in Lost Highway is pretty much how Robert Blake used to stand around the bulk bins. Lost Highway put Lynch back on Hollywood's map and things started percolating quickly. Lynch's agent, Tony Krantz, who first encouraged him to try his hand at TV, had since left CAA and was now head of Imagine Television. And he still believed that his old buddy Dave had a hit TV series in him. After having 3 shows crash and burn back to back, Twin Peaks, On the Air, and Hotel Room, Lynch had sworn off TV for good. To send the point home, Twin Peaks' Fire Walk With Me begins with a television set being smashed with an axe. But Krantz felt the time was right and approached Lynch with an idea for a series. An idea of Lynch's, in fact, from several years ago. This idea began life as a potential Twin Peaks spin-off. In the heyday of the show's success, there was some talk of giving Sherilyn Fenn's Audrey Horne her own series, where she leaves Twin Peaks and moves to Hollywood to become an actress. Krantz and Lynch pitched the show to ABC in 1999, and it was picked up for a pilot. The show would not star Sherilyn Fenn and would not feature the character of Audrey Horne. Twin Peaks was, at this point, in Lynch's own words, dead as a doornail. But the idea was very much alive. An original story about a bright-eyed, homespun, freshly scrubbed young woman who moves to Hollywood to become a star. Not long after arriving, she meets another woman, a sullen, dark-eyed brunette, who is suffering amnesia following a violent car accident. The series would follow the adventures of these 2 women as they form an unlikely friendship. They are, after all, living opposites, as they seek to solve the murder of just who the hell one of them is. It had a cool, provocative title, Mulholland Drive. But before Lynch could write the pilot for Mulholland Drive, which he was going to do alone as he and Mark Frost had long ago dissolved their partnership, he had to go and do the most Lynchian thing he ever did. What was that, you ask? Well, Lynchian, thanks to David Foster Wallace, was by now a synonym for weird. So what could David Lynch do that people would consider weird? You know, what was weird for David Lynch? How about he make a G-rated movie for Disney? For the past couple of years, Lynch's partner Mary Sweeney, along with her producing partner Neil Edelstein, had been tracking the true story of a guy named Alvin Straight. Alvin Straight was the quintessential middle American dude. He was a veteran of World War II and the Korean War, where he served in the infantry, After leaving the Army, he settled in Iowa. He fathered 7 children and worked as, and I quote his Wikipedia bio, a laborer. In 1994, Alvin's 80-year-old brother Henry suffered a stroke at his home in Blue River, Wisconsin, some 250 miles away. Alvin wanted to visit his brother, but he wasn't in the greatest shape himself. He was 73, he was suffering from emphysema, diabetes had done a number on his eyesight, so he no longer qualified for a driver's license. But Alvin wanted to see his brother, and he wanted to make the trip alone. So he did it on his lawnmower. The trip takes about 4.5 hours by car, but Alvin, moving at an average clip of about 5 miles an hour, managed to knock it out in about 6 weeks. It was far from uneventful, but to get the full story, you should really see the movie. The Straight Story had a limited release, but was a critical smash. If you have an ounce of humanity, it is impossible not to be moved by it. Even Roger Ebert loved it. Richard Farnsworth gave his final screen performance as Alvin Straight and was nominated for Best Actor. He was fighting cancer during the making of the film and is in great pain throughout. You can see it burning in his eyes in every frame. He carries the film effortlessly, a quiet, still, dignified presence. It is impossible to take your eyes off him. Now, you might ask, I just gassed on and on about how David Lynch had embarked on a new plane of storytelling, the psycho time loop multiple identity labyrinth that is Lost Highway being the prime example. So how, you might ask, does The Straight Story fit in? It does. The Straight Story is Lost Highway's opposite. Duality has always been key to David Lynch's work. John Merrick, a man so disfigured he is named the Elephant Man, is the most human character in his story. Laura Palmer, prom queen by day, trick-turning drug addict by night. The good Dale Cooper, trapped in the Black Lodge, and the evil Dale Cooper, out running amok. And then along comes Alvin Straight. Lost Highway ends where it begins, a circular trip through one man's never-ending self-inflicted torture. The Straight Story, by contrast, tells the simplest story imaginable. A man has to get from point A to point B. The end. He wants to see his brother, and at the movie's conclusion, he does. The story is a straight line across the plains of the Midwest. The title tells us what it is: a straight story. Lynch wrote and shot the Mulholland Drive TV pilot while The Straight Story was still in post-production. For the 2 leads, he chose a relatively unknown actress named Naomi Watts to play Betty Elms, the bright-eyed, blonde-haired, freshly scrubbed ingenue fresh off the bus in the big city. Watts was, and still is, a British-born actress who lived in Australia before coming to the U.S. She happened to be Nicole Kidman's best friend, but had been in L.A. for nearly 10 years knocking on doors with little to show for it, while her buddy Nicole married Tom Cruise and became a global super-duper star. For Betty's opposite number, Laura Herring, a former Miss USA, who had previously had a small role in Adam Sandler's Little Nicky, was cast as the mysterious woman suffering amnesia. Her character has no name at first, she doesn't know who she is, and so she adopts the name Rita, off a poster for the movie Gilda, starring Rita Hayworth, that is hanging in Betty's apartment. Blonde, smiling Betty knows exactly who she is and what she wants to be. A movie star, but also a great actress. Brunette, sullen Rita doesn't even know her name. We are back to Dave's Duality Playhouse with a vengeance. What followed, with the making of the TV pilot version of Mulholland Drive, is a tale as old as time. ABC hired David Lynch to create a pilot, and then they did everything in their power to de-David Lynchify it so it wasn't so damn David Lynchy. Tired of fighting the network on every front, the most outrageous note being that the 2 lead actresses, The ones the network approved of suddenly seemed to the network to be too old. Lynch learned that ABC had passed on Mulholland Drive while literally leaving for Cannes with the as-yet-to-be-released The Straight Story, and admitted to feeling a wave of euphoria upon hearing the news. He might have been finished with Mulholland Drive, but Mulholland Drive was not finished with him. Re-enter the French. Pierre Edelman was a film producer working for the French company Studio Canal. He was a friend of Lynch and a fan, and when he heard that there was a completed film by the director, even one that was made for television, that nobody was going to see, he became intrigued. He arranged for Studio Canal to buy back the negative of Mulholland Drive from ABC, give Lynch some more money to shoot what's called a closed ending. The Mulholland Drive pilot, like the Twin Peaks pilot before it, was left unresolved at the end, so that the TV series could pick up the story. The famous Red Room dream sequence in episode 3 of Twin Peaks' first season was originally intended to be the ending of the theatrical release of the pilot, which was shown as a feature film, but only in Europe. This is done largely as a way to recoup some of the money should the pilot not go to series. You know, throw it on some screens in Italy and Scotland and make back a little dough. Studio Canal hoped a similar device could wrap up Mulholland Drive, although that's not quite what happened. Nor, by the way, was any of this as easy as it sounds. The sentence, "He arranged to have Studio Canal buy back the negative from ABC and get some more money to Lynch to shoot an ending to the story," is about as much of an understatement as they formed an organization called NASA and sent some dudes to the moon. In addition to the technical headache involved in adapting a film shot for television to a film intended to be projected on the big screen, the two involved different frame rates, the actors had to agree to come back, and everybody else on the crew had to sign off on the project because their contracts were originally for a TV pilot, and now it was a theatrical movie, and that's a whole different pay scale. The point is, this endeavor was in no way simple. Making a hard job harder, David Lynch himself was not keen on the idea at all. His initial response to Pierre Edelman was, "I don't want to hear anything about this anymore." Lynch was not thrilled with the way ABC handled the whole situation. He didn't like the notes, the sets had been trashed, the props and wardrobe had all gone back into the production stream. Lynch felt it would be impossible to recreate the world of Mulholland Drive properly in order to finish the film. And even if he could recreate it, he had no idea how to end it. That idea being the most important element. That said, Lynch eventually came around and agreed to Edelman's proposal, and all of the appropriate deals were hammered out. A full year had gone by since filming had wrapped on Mulholland Drive. And then, to quote the man himself from his memoir Room to Dream, written with Kristen McKenna, "I sit down to meditate, and like a string of pearls, one idea after another came along. And when I finished meditating, I knew how to finish the film." He did more than just finish the film. The string of pearls that Lynch formed while meditating turned the TV pilot inside out, transmogrifying the show's Nancy Drew mystery into a Wizard of Oz-like fantasia. Naomi Watts is not really aspiring ingenue Betty Elms. She's a beaten-down wannabe actress named Diane Selwyn, who imagines she's Betty Elms. The mysterious Rita is really Diane's former lover, Camilla Rhodes. It's a story of unrequited love, desire, and humanity's addiction to fantasy, as exemplified by Hollywood itself. Upon its release, it was immediately hailed as Lynch's masterpiece. He was once again nominated for Best Director at that year's Academy Awards, and once again lost, this time to Ron Howard for A Beautiful Mind. The best summation of the entire experience came, again from Lynch, again from Room to Dream. So we finished the film, and it was exactly what it was supposed to be. And we went to Cannes. It went well in the world, but it never made a lot of money. But nothing I do ever really does. We're all just working for the man now. We get a shot of white lightning and a chick, and that's about it. With a critically acclaimed film and an Oscar nomination, Lynch had a good chance of setting up another movie, but his days of being a director for hire, as far as feature films were concerned, were a thing of the past. He spent the first decade of the 2000s solidly ensconced at his compound in the Hollywood Hills, painting, making music, making furniture, making the odd commercial. As the age of the internet dawned, he launched davidlynch.com, which functioned as a micro-mini dial-up TV network programmed exclusively by Lynch. For $10 a month, you got stuff like a primitive flash animation cartoon called Dumbland, Rabbits, a sitcom about a family of rabbits starring the cast of Mulholland Drive in rabbit suits. And yes, that really is Naomi Watts and Laura Herring in the suits. Music, photos, paintings. One of my favorite things was a 5-minute short called Dead Mouse with Ants, which shows exactly what it describes. But you can't say it's not fascinating. The site was run out of his home studio, as was all the music. He was getting closer and closer to his dream of living what he called the art life. In his words,
the art life is a great life. It's coffee and cigarettes, maybe some red wine. It's catching ideas and translating them to one medium or another. In the world of painting, it's getting deep into that world and just getting lost in there. It's just a dream. I always loved to paint and draw. I felt like this was the life of a painter.
Whatever he did, paintings, sculpture, songs, an internet sitcom starring rabbits, he approached it the way a painter approaches a painting. It came from his imagination and was done on his terms. He certainly was not doing it for money. He could have made a fortune for himself if he just took some gigs, and he was offered them. American Beauty, The Ring, on and on. But he wanted to be in his studio, following his muse. One morning, in 2005, he was walking outside his home and bumped into Laura Dern, who had starred in Blue Velvet and Wild at Heart. They hadn't seen each other in a while, and as it turns out, Dern was now Lynch's neighbor. As they caught up, she casually said, "We should do something." Something turned out to be a 14-page monologue that Lynch wrote for Dern that he shot on a little digital video camera. Just another one of David's little experiments, filmed in 4 hours in his painting studio. But when they were done, David caught another idea, saying to Dern, "What if this is a movie?" That movie became 2006's Inland Empire, a 3-hour experimental dream logic psychological thriller starring Dern, Justin Theroux, Jeremy Irons, Grace Zabriskie, and a host of others. Shot completely on digital video in Los Angeles and Poland. The film followed the trajectory of Lynch's artistic evolution. He worked without a finished script. He did rely on a scene-by-scene outline, but the freedom of digital video allowed him to make the film the way a painter paints. He was handling the directing as well as, more or less, the cinematography, editing, and sound design. If he had an idea on the fly, he did it. It was run and gun, but he knew what he wanted. The only time the film ever ran into trouble with audiences was when they came expecting a linear story. To maintain the painting analogy, people came looking for landscapes and got surrealism instead. You might not like it, but you must, at the very least, judge it for what it is. The film, which does have a story, fared much better in Europe, where audiences were accustomed to challenging narrative styles. France's Cinema Bible Cahiers du Cinéma listed Inland Empire as the second best film of the year. It was listed as one of the films of the decade by Sight and Sound, and cited as one of the 10 most underrated movies of the decade by The Guardian. The biggest film in America that year was Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest. If he was disappointed by American audiences' perplexed reaction to Inland Empire, he certainly did not show it. He seemed completely free of expectation, happy to create. He released 2 musical albums the following year, Polish Night Music, an instrumental collaboration with Marek Zabrowski, and The Air is on Fire, an exhibition soundscape. In other words, an ambient soundtrack for an art exhibition with Dean Hurley. In 2011, he released Crazy Clown Time, his first honest-to-God solo record. Co-written and co-produced with Dean Hurley. If you like David Lynch, if you like his movies, if you like his soundtracks, you will like his other albums. Karen O, lead singer of the Yeah Yeah Yeahs, provides the vocal on the opening track, Pinky's Dream.
Pinky's Dodge, going fast away. Purple, going up away. Orange, glowing away. Pinky's Dream, glowing away. What do you see? Flying down the road.
At the end of 2011, just after Christmas, Lynch got a call from an old pal, Twin Peaks co-creator Mark Frost, and the 2 men went out to lunch at Musso and Frank's. Frost pointed out something interesting. The last time we saw Dale Cooper and Laura Palmer, the good Dale Cooper was trapped in the Red Room, and Palmer says to him,
I'll see you again in 25 years.
That 25-year deadline was coming up, and the 2 men began a serious discussion about how to properly return to that mysterious town in the Pacific Northwest. Without telling a soul, they began collaborating on a script. They took their time. It was well over a year just figuring out how to go about it. One thing that Twin Peaks: The Return, its eventual title, makes clear is that while they did want to go back to Twin Peaks, they did not want to go back to 1990. While featuring the cast and locations of the old show, it expands upon that world aggressively, adding over 100 new speaking roles and spanning the globe from Twin Peaks to New York City, to the suburbs of Las Vegas, to Paris. Of course, nobody knew any of this was happening until October 3rd, 2014, when David Lynch and Mark Frost simultaneously posted to what was then Twitter, "Dear Twitter friends, that gum you like is going to come back in style. Hashtag damn good coffee." And people lost their shit. The journey from here to there was not easy. But as Mulholland Drive showed, sometimes you just have to settle back and ride the bull. It's gonna get to where it needs to get, however it has to get there, and however long it takes. Lynch actually walked away from The Return at one point because he felt that a deal just could not be made. The problem being that Showtime was thinking of the show in the traditional television episodic format. You make this many shows and we'll give you X amount of dollars per show. But Lynch had grown past that. He might have been making Twin Peaks, but this was still the man who made Inland Empire. Lynch saw Twin Peaks: The Return as one big movie, a sprawling epic that he and Frost would write and that Lynch would direct. The new series relied heavily on the lore established and the now reappraised and rehabilitated Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. And unlike that film, Lynch was not about to leave half of what he shot on the cutting room floor to make his running time. He was going to shoot what he wanted to shoot, and they would figure out how many episodes it would take when they were in the editing room. Eventually, a deal was struck, and the two men got down to work, embarking on a 4-year odyssey that would end up as a sprawling 18-episode season. It was not what anyone was expecting. And like all of Lynch's post-Twin Peaks work, it was often challenging and maddening. But in the end, it was, like his films, something you could go back to again and again and again and never not find something new. It confounded expectations, but was never unsatisfying. The story is actually quite clear. It just doesn't spell itself out in a billboard so you won't miss it while also scrolling on your phone and staring at a sandwich. The good Dale Cooper has been trapped in the Black Lodge for 25 years, and it is now time for the evil Dale, who is on the outside and now going by the name Mr. C, to go back in. But he doesn't want to, so he creates a tulpa, a figure from Tibetan mysticism, basically a stand-in or an avatar. So when the beings from the Black Lodge come for Mr. C, they get the tulpa instead, leaving Mr. C free to wreak havoc in the world. And oh boy, has he wreaked it. He reeks and reeks and reeks. The guy cannot stop reeking. The tulpa comes in the form of Dougie Jones, a corrupt insurance agent from Las Vegas. All three roles, Dougie, the good Dale, and the bad Dale, are played in a bravura performance by Kyle MacLachlan. It is criminally underpraised. He knocks it out of the park. Of the 18 episodes, I will mention 3 specifically. Episode 8, which traces the origin of Bob, the evil entity from the Black Lodge, back to the atomic explosions of the 1950s. That episode, shot entirely in black and white and largely without dialogue, is quite simply one of the best horror films of that decade. If George Romero was making horror films in 1956, he could not have made a better film than Twin Peaks: The Return, Episode 8. Episode 17 rewards the viewer by bringing the story to a seemingly happy, conventional ending. But then, in Episode 18, it is all undone by our hero's hubris and good intentions. It hits you like a fist in the chest and shows you that at every twist and turn of this 18-hour saga, David Lynch and Mark Frost were fully in command. They knew exactly what they were doing, where they were heading, and how they were going to get there. Following The Return, Lynch went back to his art studio. His online presence, davidlynch.com, had shut down but still existed, and Lynch continued to do his morning weather report, which became a staple, especially in Los Angeles. Oddly, it was during the height of the pandemic, when everyone was on lockdown, that everyone in LA that I knew of started their day with David Lynch's weather report and sermonette. His dedication to world peace through transcendental meditation, his uncompromising work, his dedication to the art life, the fact that he never sold out, he was always true to who he was, had allowed David Lynch to evolve into something like the counterculture Mr. Rogers. During the COVID pandemic, it was starting the day with David Lynch that made everyone feel normal.
Good morning. It's September 30, 2020, and it's a Wednesday. Here in LA, very clear, very still right now, 70 degrees Fahrenheit, 21 Celsius. Okay, this is what I've heard and I'll relay to you. The thorns on the rose bush right now are big, and there are many of them, and they're sharp. These are the poisonous thorns of negativity. But the rose is so much bigger. It's huge and beautiful. This is the rose of positivity. And this is the rose of our future. And it is huge and it is beautiful. Right now, the thorns of negativity are making their last desperate stand. But soon they're going to wither and fall away. They're going to rot and disappear. So don't despair. Great times are coming for the United States and for the whole world family. Should be going up to around 98 degrees Fahrenheit this afternoon, 37 Celsius, and we should be enjoying, once again, along with the toasty heat, those beautiful blue skies and golden sunshine. Everyone, have a great day.
In the September 2024 issue of Sight and Sound magazine, in an interview primarily aimed at promoting his new album, Cellophane Memories, that he had recorded with singer Krista Bell, Lynch was asked if, after the long isolation of COVID, the idea of going back onto a film set felt daunting. He remarked, almost casually, "No, I'll tell you, I've gotten emphysema from smoking for so long of a time, and so I'm homebound, whether I like it or not. I can't go out, and I can only walk a short distance before I'm out of oxygen." In a follow-up article in People, Lynch proclaimed that he could barely walk across a room. Everybody thought David Lynch had retired and was dying. And so he took to Twitter to clarify. On August 5th, 2024, he posted, "Ladies and gentlemen, yes, I have emphysema from many years of smoking. I have to say that I enjoyed smoking very much, and I do love tobacco, the smell of it, lighting cigarettes on fire, smoking them. But there is a price to pay for this enjoyment, and the price for me is emphysema. I have now quit smoking for over 2 years. Recently, I had many tests, and the good news is that I am in excellent shape, except for the emphysema. I am filled with happiness, and I will never retire. And I want you all to know that I really appreciate your concern. Love, David." Only David Lynch could make a warning that cigarettes will kill you sound like a commercial for how great they are. Sadly, not half a year later, in January of 2025, a combination of extreme drought conditions, unseasonably high heat, a massive windstorm, and an aging power grid caused a series of wildfires to ravage Los Angeles. In extreme high winds, older power lines and electric transformers spark and even explode, dropping flames onto the bone-dry forest floor. The resulting fire is then whipped up by the high winds, spreading like, you get it. The Palisades Fire, which began on January 7th, 2025, leveled what was known as the Pacific Palisades. The Eaton Fire, which began the same day, ravaged the city of Altadena. The Hearst Fire burned a swath north through Sylmar. If you were in one of the areas that was not on fire, you had your bags packed by the door waiting for the evacuation order. And if you went outside without a mask, you would be coughing your guts out inside of about a minute. On January 8th, a fire erupted right smack dab in the center of the Hollywood Hills, the Runyon Fire. The only fire that investigators feel relatively sure was actually arson. That burned 60 acres just north of Hollywood Boulevard. I had to evacuate, and so did David Lynch. By all accounts, he was not happy having to leave his home. The hustle and the bustle of evacuation and relocation put a heavy strain on his fragile health. And on January 16th, while meditating, David Lynch passed from this life. People all over the world mourned his death, but in LA, where he was such a presence, it was a huge blow. And now David Lynch was gone. The Bob's Big Boy in Toluca Lake, where Lynch famously went every day for coffee and a milkshake, became an impromptu meeting place for people who wanted to feel some sort of connection. The statue of Bob out front became a fittingly weird shrine. It still is.
Maharishi has two missions in life: enlightenment of the individuals and peace on earth. The whole secret is that field within. Unbounded field, the transcendent, a home of total knowledge, modern science's unified field, an eternal field. Infinite it is, unbounded it is, immortal, immutable, always and forever been there. Why don't people know about this? Why aren't people learning to transcend every day and experiencing this? Because when you experience it, you infuse some of that, you grow in that, negativity lifts away, all positive grows. It's such a blessing for the human being. So many problems in this world. This solves the problems. It's an ocean of solutions within us. People get happy. They don't want to kill each other. The key to peace on earth is there. It's just unbelievable. This has got to happen, and it's got to happen soon. Look at the world we live in now. And it doesn't have to be this way.
Bob's Big Boy makes great hamburgers and lots of good things to eat. It's fun, it's friends, it's laughs, it's time to have yourself a treat. And the place to go is Bob's, you know. You can have lots of fun. 'Cause Bob's loves kids and kids love Bob's. Just ask anyone. You know, Bob's loves kids and kids love Bob. Just ask anyone.
And now, on with the show.
It is a warm, sunny, sun-dappled day high atop the Mulholland Drive view shelf in the People's Republic of California, in the former United States. My guest today comes to us all the way from Italy via the blessings of science and technology. Alexandra Serros has a new book out called Ida Lupino, Forgotten Auteur. I've spoken about Ida Lupino before in this podcast. Underrated, underappreciated actress, and one of the first female directors in Hollywood. It's a shame she's not more known. Hopefully that will change. Please welcome to our microphone, Alexandra Serros.
Thank you, Dana. Nice to be here.
How did you come about to write this book? What inspired you to write this book? And
it was a poster, and it said outrage. And I saw it, and I was in graduate school. I was getting my PhD at UCLA in media studies. And I thought, this is so interesting. What is this? And then it said directed by Lupino. And then I realized it was about rape in 1952. when the production code still existed. And I thought, how did she do this? So I started getting interested in her and kind of created a methodology and did my dissertation. And then when it was over, my committee said, you have to write the book. I went, what book? They said, you have to write a book about Lupino. You have to do your dissertation. I said, my dissertation, nobody's going to read that. So basically I did it, but I had to start all over again. And
because it was a different format, or?
Yeah, it's an archival study, but it was the poster.
It was a poster for the film Outrage, which was not the first film she directed, but she is known mostly, I think, to the average people. She was in a lot of B movies in the 40s. Certainly a known actress. She was probably most famous for High Sierra with Humphrey Bogart. She was in a lot of, she's from a big theatrical family, correct? She's not American. She's British.
Right. And they were acrobats and clowns, and they came from Naples 350 years ago. So I did do some studying in Bologna and found some things about Lupino Lane and Stanley Lupino and so forth. Comedians mostly, clowns, eccentric dancers, and they were run out of Italy. And they went to England.
And how were they run out of Italy?
It's really unclear.
Italy's innate hatred of clowns.
I'm innately frightened of.
You're in good company.
They say for political reasons. His name was Giorgio with 2 G's in there. Lupino. Maybe he was trying to get money in the piazza or something.
Right.
And run out. Yeah.
Wow. She came to America, and what is really fascinating that you go into in the book is she was clearly incredibly intelligent woman, didn't want to be an actress, wanted to be a writer. And it's one of these people like, well, I don't want to be an actress, but I guess and then they become a movie star. She was by definition a movie star, but it's not what she really wanted to do.
Well, she was exhausted by the noir stereotype.
Right.
And they kept stereotyping. She didn't ever want to be stereotyped. And that's important because that's part of her character. She wanted to be stereotyped as a feminist or a non-feminist. She didn't want to be stereotyped as, just doing the certain kinds of stories. She was, she ran the gamut for genre.
Yeah, she didn't want to be stereotyped as an actress or in her career. She wore a lot of hats, as they say, which was not common at the time. What I found really fascinating about the story is now we're talking about the early 40s. She was aware of how men viewed a woman moving into their realm of expertise. Mm-hmm. And she said that I sometimes would ask questions that I already knew the answer to, so men would feel comfortable. Can you go into that a little bit? Because I find it's really fascinating, and it's the kind of thing that a guy would never think about. Right.
Well, she was more a product of her time than of her sex. And so she had to behave that way because women were just not allowed to get behind the camera. And so she had to constantly prove herself. And she had to, here she is working in a totally masculine area and being called an anti-feminist. Would any TV directors today be called anti-feminists? I don't think so. But she was called that. But at the same time, the men were like, in the studios and various places, you've got to feminize yourself. So because she could write, they made her write articles about herself, like how to landscape my garden and my cream sauce. And it's in a Dinah Shore cookbook, and how to set a Thanksgiving table. And this stuff, kind of annoyed her, but it was really easy for her to do. And she figured if that's all I have to do to work, fine. She also didn't care about an archive. She just wanted to work, which is something I really kind of liked about her, because she wasn't about what, her legacy. Consequently, she didn't have a legacy. And so it's important that she be recovered for the 5th time.
Yeah, that's really well put, that she didn't, it's not that she didn't, let's say today we would say brand. She didn't brand herself. She went out of her way to not brand herself.
Right. She was constantly rebranding herself.
Yeah. There's a great quote in the book. I want to read it about the danger of that or the benefit of that. You quote a man named Richard Dyer. Dyer. Movie stars matter, but when they become commodities, they can lose control of how they are perceived, not only by their audiences, but also within the industry. Constant rebranding likely played a role in causing Marilyn Monroe, Orson Welles, and even Marlon Brando to disappear into unstable personas. As Francis Coppola famously said, as soon as you become that big, you get absorbed. And Ida Lupino's answer was to rebrand herself strategically by revising her image whenever her work in the industry changes. She was a chameleon, but then she had to also not stand out. It's like, not only could she write, produce, direct, and act in the 40s, but she knew that she had to be seen basically not doing it.
That's right. So that's why she ultimately became Mother, called herself Mother, because Mother is both intimidating, but also nurturing. So who's gonna go up against Mother?
Right.
Who's gonna, so that was kind of her thing. And her director chair often said Mother on it. There are 8mm films at the Pickford Library on Vine that were fascinating. And you saw that. And, that she kind of stayed with that, because that seemed to work for a while and kept her head down. And really all she wanted to do was work.
Yeah. And she was this was in the studio system. She was a Warner Brothers contract player. Jack Warner, I would say Jack Warner was a famous tyrant, but they were all famous tyrants.
Yeah.
all of the guys that ran those studios were lunatics. She called herself the poor man's Bette Davis because she said she often took a lot of parts that Bette Davis turned down, but also, like Bette Davis, she bumped up against Jack Warner a lot by turning stuff down, which was, to put it bluntly, frowned upon. You weren't supposed to really have an opinion or a vested interest in what roles you took. But that's what led her into creating her own company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Filmmakers with 1M.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
People always ask me, why? I said, I don't know. Maybe it's more hand sewn that way. Maybe it's more handmade. Maybe it stood out. It was different. It was, it was a logo sort of, a title. But yeah, she did that. And luckily Howard Hughes stepped in and he financed Outrage, Art Fast and Beautiful, and The Hitchhiker. He balked at The Bigamist because he didn't want to distribute it, and it failed, and it kind of it was six. There were 6 movies in 5 years, by the way. This is 1953, and it bombed. And today, it's a fascinating film. It is way ahead of its time. She was a modernist, and I'm sorry to say, but that was her swan song for that little period of time. She went on to direct The Trouble with Angels, and of course, so many TV shows. I discovered.
The first film that she directed was Not Wanted, correct? But there was a movie before that she directed uncredited, and that sort of is what got her foot in the door Can you expand on that story a little bit? Because it's
Not Wanted. She was not credited.
Oh, it was not Wanted was the film that was.
Because
okay.
Elmer Clifton was hired and then had a heart attack 72 hours in. So she saw that she had a chance and she took it. Now she says, oh, I had written it. I understood it. We were producing it. I had to direct it. But there were other directors around that would work for a price. That Anthony Mann, for instance, she could have hired him.
Right now, she's not. We should give a little bit of background that the film Not Wanted was one of these movies that came out of her company, the filmmakers, and this was a company that she had formed basically because Jack Warner kept suspending her from a Warner Brothers contract. So she's had that realization that a lot of people have quite wisely. I'm going to have to make my own movies. As my manager said quite wisely, be the person that hires you. So she and her husband at the time found this company. She wrote a movie. Is this a movie that she wrote?
Yes.
Correct, called Not Wanted. And people assume that she made all these film noirs because she acted in them, but the films that she directed, with one glaring exception, which is probably the movie for which she's most known for directing, The Hitchhiker, which we'll get to. She did all of these sort of films with social commentary. And Not Wanted is from 1949, and it's about an unwanted pregnancy.
And it's about a woman who has this pregnancy, has to take it to term, because of course there's no abortion, and then give it up.
Right.
And she was very interested in social realism. And she had met with Rossellini. He influenced her highly. And he said, why don't you guys in Hollywood ever make films about real people? So that struck her. And so they were all in that sort of vein, except for The Hitchhiker. She made that movie made a lot of money. I have the budgets in the book, but it made so much money because the women went to see it. And and it got really good reviews. Her credit's really weird on that. It says, and introducing Ida Lupino introduces Sally Forrest. And of course, that was one of the things she always did. She found unknown actors, hired them. They were less expensive. There was always a strategy involved, but they were good.
This was Poverty Row. This is
definitely.
To make movies, because we did a story on this podcast not too long ago about Detour. And it was sort of the same thing that Edgar Ulmer had to do. He had a big deal. I think it was also at Warner Brothers. And it was like, if you want autonomy, you have to work with a shit budget. So you can have autonomy, but you can't have it here. So all these people go to a Poverty Row, Republic, and all those studios along Gower Gulch, and they can do what they want as long as they keep a financial cap on the budget. Right. But that means you can't have big actors, you can't have big stars. So that's what she did, and that allowed her to make a movie like Not Wanted, which I'm assuming a major studio like Warner Brothers wouldn't even do.
No, it's too provocative. I think let's see, Not Wanted. I don't know. I think it was Kino Lorber maybe finally distributed it. Something, it's always very iffy in there because they had to find people and they're always looking for money. But I mean, one of the reasons that she stopped acting really was because if you turned down something at Warner Brothers, you couldn't work any other place. And that changed with the Olivia de Havilland changed that. She went to court and said, it's not fair. But at that time, she couldn't get other work. So she had to do radio. And Orson Welles also did radio between jobs.
Right.
So that's part of the reason. So yes, so she made Not Wanted in Bunker Hill downtown. She did a lot of docudramatic sequences in all of her films. That's one of them. It's the introductory shot. It's the opening shot. It's fantastic. And, Sally Forrest in the movie has sort of a mental illness. And Lupino's always working with the themes of mental illness, entrapment, young people in the foreground, adults in the background, redemption. Those are her themes. Very similar, by the way, to Nicholas Ray, who was the darling of Andrew Cyrus and all those, the pantheon of
it was, because people always put her in the sort of Elmore Leonard drawer, but she was much closer to Nicholas Ray. This is a great quote about her from Martin Scorsese that sums up what you're saying. As a star, Lupino had no taste for glamour, and the same was true as a director. The story she told in Outrage, Never Fear, Hard, Fast, and Beautiful, The Bigamist, and The Hitchhiker were intimate, always set within a precise social milieu. She wanted to do pictures with poor, bewildered people, because that's what we are. Her heroines were young women with middle-class security that was shattered by trauma, an unwanted pregnancy, polio, rape, bigamy, parental abuse. There's a sense of pain, panic, and cruelty that colors every frame. Yeah, you're not going to get those movies made at Warner Brothers.
You will probably not today either, some way.
No. And so that not wanted. She could have taken a director's credit, but she didn't, correct?
Nope, she didn't. She just said, and introduce Ida Lupino introducing Sally Forrest.
And so the first movie that she directed with a credit was what? Was that Outrage?
Not Wanted.
No, where she was credited as the director.
She was credited Never Fear. I meant Never Fear.
Right. Yeah. And what is Never Fear? What is Never Fear about?
Well, it's about polio. And I was around in the 50s, and our biggest fear where everybody went to bed was waking up either with the bomb or polio. So no one wanted to see that movie. It was way too near history. But she used the Dr. Dramatic sort of scenes, and she used the Cabot Center in Santa Monica, which was a real place where people who had polio and other ailments would go. It was about, again, entrapment, but this was about a woman's body being sort of deteriorating.
Yeah. And she had polio, correct?
Yeah. A small case of it, but she did have it.
And what I read was that there was a widespread mini pandemic in Los Angeles of polio that was largely due to dirty swimming pools.
Yes. And everybody was standing in line and would get that vaccine, and that was the end of it. But yeah, she was terrified of polio.
You're saying polio vaccines are a good thing?
Well, maybe, yeah.
Well,
at a certain age, not when you're like 8 weeks old and living in the Palisades.
Yeah. Well, hopefully with the current administration, we'll bring polio back and we'll be allowed to do our own research.
Yeah, polio was one of those things we did sort of cure, I think,
And yeah, she did not have polio as a child. She had it. She was a working actress living in Los Angeles, correct?
Yeah.
Wow. And after and Never Fear was about polio, and then she made Outrage, which is about rape. This is rape. This is a movie in 1950.
She couldn't use the word. She had to say attack.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about Outrage and how it was received at the time, because again, she's making movies for an audience that Hollywood doesn't really acknowledge.
Right. Well, there's a problem with Outrage, and in fact, I have to write an article for something about it. The first half is perfect, full of suspense, very scary, incredible directing. it stands up today. The acting's wonderful by Mala Powers. And it's really about this small community who turns against this young woman. But then the second half, and she feels the same way as I do.
Right.
She said the second half, she just went off the rails. It doesn't kind of make sense. It's about redemption, but it's kind of it's ambiguous. It's not clear. It's not even ambiguous, it's just not clear. It doesn't fit with the first half at all. It doesn't have that intensity. She lost control of it a bit. And, so for me, it's a kind of divided film. And, I'm working on it right now. I'm working on this paper, and it's really difficult to write about because it's such a dramatic idea. And the first half is excellently wrought and very suspenseful and full of surprise, which Hitchcock always said she was one of the only people who could do both. It's very hard to do surprise and suspense, one or the other, but not the same, not both. And she managed both. And Mala Powers did a great job. It's just that it meandered and it became sort of Circean. And it was like suddenly about redemption. And there was like this Circean figure.
In relation to Douglas Sirk.
Yeah, sorry. These iconic figures. I mean, later, actually in Not Wanted, Hugh O'Brien was that figure, that same figure, that kind of ascetic, not female, not male, kind, sort of priest person, but lay person. So anyway, in Outrage, she tried to go toward that figure and it just doesn't work, but not for her not trying. I mean, it was a tough
lack of trying.
make. Yeah.
Did she write Outrage?
Yes, she did. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Was it?
She wrote it, and
was it an adaptation of a book, or did she just pitch the scenario?
No, as far as I'm concerned, she wrote it. There was a book called The Outrage, I think,
right,
that Paul Newman did and Lawrence Harvey and stuff. That's a different film,
right? That
was like a Rashomon. That was actually a remake of Rashomon, I think.
But it really, I mean, she is by definition an auteur.
Oh yes, absolutely.
And what is really, she was not the first woman director in Hollywood. There were a couple of women directors in the 20s and 30s.
Yes.
But mostly with silent films, correct?
Exactly. Many women did silent films, but then when they turned to sound, they lost their jobs because men stepped in.
Right.
And war was over, and they did a lot of war movies, and men came, and that was the audience.
Right.
So, the women were shut out. So, also a lot of actors didn't make it through because they had terrible voices. So,
I was likening what's going on in the business now with streaming and AI and all of these things coming in on everyone at once. It's sort of like talkies and TV at the same time.
Yeah.
Nothing makes me laugh harder now than speaking with somebody who acts like they know what's going on.
No, nobody does.
Yeah.
People no, they don't know.
Did Outrage do any business? Because Not Wanted did a lot of business.
It did enough to keep Howard Hughes happy to do the next two. She had a contract with him for 3 at RKO. He owned RKO then. He bought it. And she knew him. I found a picture of them together. She looked like she was like 14 or something.
Oh, he'd have loved that. I think I know what they like.
Yeah. And they were riding bikes, and her mother chaperoned that little date. But she knew way back. So he did it. And he did it on the basis of the money that Not Wanted made.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because we've been talking a lot on this podcast about David Lynch. And that came up with Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me because it's a movie about sexual abuse. And I can understand people don't want to hear it. People don't want to see it.
No.
and know about it. And so at the time it came out, I imagine the similar thing happened with Outrage. People just like, get this out of my face.
Yeah. Yeah. People were frightened by it.
But then for the people who have had to deal with those things, the movie becomes so important.
Yes.
Hard, Fast, and Beautiful, was that another, she directed that, but.
Yeah. Oh yeah. She directed it.
Was that another social story? Socially
Definitely.
relevant
Again,
story?
the mother is trying to help the daughter not become like the mother after the war, not be stuck in the kitchen and get entrapment, not be stuck, just doing hard labor and not following their passions or whatever they want to do in life. And Sally Forrest again was in this movie and she was also in Never Fear because she can dance and she can move and she was a good athlete. And they had a code. It's sort of like De Niro and Scorsese, after a while work. And, by the way, I had access to all of Sally Forrest's, archive, and I produced it, and her niece very graciously let UCLA have it. So it's there, in special collections at UCLA. If anybody wants to see pictures and things, they're fantastic.
Like Ida Lupino, she never really had the lasting imprint that you would think she would have had.
No, and she wanted to sort of get out of acting and get married. She married Milo Frank, William Morris agent, and kind of traveled all over the world and lived happily ever after. But Hard, Fast, and Beautiful, again, was about a mother trying to help her daughter. And this particular mother, she saw that her daughter could really play tennis. So she started sort of bribing some agents to get her on the circuit. And then once she was on the circuit, she had a chance to really show how good she was. And it's kind of like a stage mother. Her mother like forced her to play tennis. And so she started hating tennis. She won Wimbledon, which is kind of, amazing. But anyway, she won Wimbledon.
It's not like she was a good tennis player. She won Wimbledon.
Yes. Oh. And the daughter hated her mother. And, she was only trying to do, literally, she's like an anti-hero. She was only trying to do what she thought would be good for her daughter. She didn't want her daughter to wind up like her in a kind of failed marriage. It just, so the mother had good intentions, but went about it incorrectly. It's sort of like, it's about white collar crime and sports, if you can believe it, in 1953.
Well, and clearly this is a version of Ida Lupino's own story where, as she said, the only future I saw for myself if I didn't branch out was of being a neurotic movie star with no family and no home. So aware of that, she went into areas of the business where women were not normally present.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, she has to pay a lot of lip service to, I'm really a mom and a housewife.
Right.
I do this.
Right.
But so it's almost like a triple blind. Like, I know this isn't good for me. I'm not going to do it, but I'm going to pretend like I'm going to do it. And that will allow me to tell the stories about how it's not good for me.
Right.
How she kept track of all that stuff is really what's amazing to me. I think about Madonna in the 80s and 90s, who was so skilled at branding herself and repackaging herself. But she had a whole other set of hurdles. When Ida Lupino is coming up, ambition itself was frowned upon.
Exactly.
Because you were supposed to be a housewife and a mom.
That's right. And that's what, it's what the critics kind of got wrong. The first wave of critics got wrong about her was that calling her this anti-feminist, because sometimes people at the end would get married. Sally Forrest gets married to some guy, gives the Wimbledon trophy to her mother. The last shot, of course, is great because it's Lupino. Her mother standing alone in Wimbledon with this trophy, alone. Hates her. She has a failed marriage, but she's got the trophy. But they thought that the protagonist was Sally. No, the protagonist is the mother. She's an anti-hero, but she's a protagonist. She has the arc. She has the character arc. So I don't understand why they kept getting her wrong on that. But, she wasn't promoting marriage. She believed in marriage. She was married, but she also had friends who were gay and who were whatever. I mean, she didn't, it was just her. It's just what she liked for herself. But I really think the critics were pretty hard on her, and I don't think they would have been that hard on a woman. I mean, on a man.
Right. And so she's also, Ida Lupino is also acting in these movies as well.
She's acting in other movies too. For the production
she's
to make money.
Yeah, she's acting on movies and in radio.
Right.
Again, she has a very modern career in the sense of you need 11 jobs to survive. But yeah, in her film The Bigamist, she directed it and is also the lead, correct?
Yes. She didn't want to do that, but the actress who is now with her husband, because she divorced Collier Young in the middle of all this, but they still worked together. They were really good together. And he married Olivia de Havilland's sister. God, I'm dropping her name for some reason.
Yeah, it's not it's not the same last name. It's
no, it's not. I can't think of her name. But anyway, she said, I don't want to be in this unless you're going to be in it, Ida. You have to be in it too. And it's like she didn't want to be the big gorilla.
Right.
So Ida said, okay, I'll do it. But she was very concerned. George Discount was the cinematographer, and she was very concerned about how she looked because she couldn't tell because she can't direct herself. So she would really use him as a sounding board. How was I? Was this good or this bad? But I thought she was great. She's a very subtle actress for the time. Much more subtle.
She gives very modern performances in films that are certainly not theatrically stagey, but of their time in terms of pre-method acting.
Right. Yeah. And she uses, again, the docudramatic element of the bus going through Hollywood, looking at Hollywood stars' homes. I mean, it's so funny and she has this sardonic sense of humor that comes up often in her films in various places. If you want to look at it, if you don't, it's just there. It's the Hollywood bus looking at houses. And she has this great little exchange with Eddie O'Brien. They were great friends. And, it's really stands up. There's a tiny monograph for your listeners that are interested, called The Bigamist from BFI, British Film. And it's written by Amelie Hasty. And it's such a perfect, it's a small book, but it's perfect. And it's about the bigamist. If anybody's interested, it's almost like a little treasure.
Yeah, the story of the bigamist. I'm reading from your book now.
Yes.
The Bigamist. Lupino plays a waitress in a dreary Hollywood restaurant, and that's interesting because she's already in Hollywood. She's not going to Hollywood. She's already here, and it blows. She plays a waitress in a dreary Hollywood restaurant who marries an already married man. The main character in Never Fear is confronted with a different type of dread. That's a similar thing, but it's like she doesn't know that. Does she know that he's already married when they get married?
Yeah, tell her.
And then it's amazing that those movies are like. I guess you could make that movie today, but people would go. Bigamy is also one of those
weird things. Like
it's what? It's like. I'm not comparing it to incest, but there's there's a physical reaction to it when you hear about it. Like, ugh.
Yeah, it's like precursor to polygamy, maybe.
Yeah.
Again, she's dealing with the theme of infertility. His other wife sells refrigerators. It's very funny. So she's very cold, very blonde.
Yeah. No need for Freud. We've got the symbolism.
Right. So she can't have babies, but Lupino can have a baby. So it's again about having a child, wanting a child, not being able to have a child, infertility, being trapped in your body again, in another way. And her themes are quite consistent in these movies.
Yeah, and
throughout.
there is a very Nicholas Ray, Douglas Sirk.
Oh yeah.
Approach, and yet the movie for which she is the most famous in terms of directing is the movie that is the least like the rest of her output, which is The Hitchhiker.
Right. Well, it's still about entrapment. And the women, I really think that the women in the movie, the wives of these two guys, are sort of a ghostly presence all the way through the film.
Yeah, because they're not in the movie per se, but their presence is felt.
They're discussed. They're talked about. Even there's a monologue by Bill Tallman, who is the hitchhiker, who is the criminal, the killer. That's another thing. She's writing about serial killers.
Yeah. For people who aren't familiar with the plot, because it's interesting. People conflate this version of The Hitchhiker with the version of The Hitchhiker that was the novel and the radio play that Orson Welles did. It was also later a Twilight Zone episode.
Yeah.
And people think that because Ida Lupino, and we'll get to that, was also very involved in the Twilight Zone, and I think people conflate it. This is a different story. Is it based on The Devil Thumbs a Ride?
No, but that was there, and it's very similar, and I don't know if she read it or whatever, saw it. I don't know.
So tell us this plot.
That would be the precursor for it.
Tell us the plot of The Hitchhiker.
Well, it's these two guys. They want to go off on a little vacation away from their families together, like the old days. And one of the guys, Eddie O'Brien, is a little more loose. Frank Lovejoy's a little more, tight with his family. And they go through this whorehouse where they used to go. And Frank Lovejoy pretends to be asleep. And Eddie O'Brien tries to wake him up. And Frank Lovejoy says, I just want to go to sleep. So in a subtle way, he says, I don't want to do this. He felt guilty. So they move on and they're driving along and this guy thumbs a ride. And it's Eddie Tallman, who again, she made him famous. He was the guy on Perry Mason who lost all the cases for Perry Mason.
Hamilton Berger?
Hamilton Berger. He became Hamilton.
Now think about this. His name was Hamburger. I think we know why he was so upset.
So the whole rest of the movie is them being kidnapped in a way by this guy. But interestingly, again, she has empathy for everybody, including her villains. This guy's story was there were 5 siblings. The mother died. The dad didn't want them. Again, not wanted. Puts them at the bottom of a well. They are discovered, and all four of them are find adoptive families. He doesn't. Nobody wants him because he has a slow eye. And so he goes through the eye. Yeah. So he goes through the system, right? Juvie, jail, more. And so he's a real lunatic. He's psychotic. And this slow eye doesn't ever close. It stays open. So you never know if he's sleeping or not. So when they're camping out, they can't tell if he's asleep or awake. They try to get away. There's a lot of suspense. A lot of times when they try to get away, or he pits them against each other with guns, it's very scary, and it works today. And people were frightened, but it made a lot of money. It was a big seller. It was her best film. It was her penultimate film. And she felt it was her best film because it was all of a piece. Musaraka was fantastic. He's a cinematographer, and was the DP for the original Cat People with Val Lewton.
Val Lewton, yeah.
Yeah. And so, he was great. And by the way, her cinematographers were all really great because they really knew she knew what she was doing. And that's a sign. Okay. It's like the guy, Archie Stout. He worked for John Ford. I think he did All Quiet on the Western Front or something. He thought she was best he's ever known for lenses. She knew about lenses because she had been an actress, and she watched what lenses they used and what was the reason for it. She also was such a good actress that, you have these guys in the desert. Okay. That can get really boring. You just keep going through desert. But she had this way of painterly, sort of like John Alton, who's a great cinematographer, putting him in the rocks in a 2-shot or sometimes in a 3-shot when they're all against the car, but Tallman had a gun on them. And it was very painterly the way she did it. And then Musaraka was great with, the noir lighting that he gave it. And, it's the expanse of the desert, yet it felt claustrophobic. So,
it's a lot. Yeah. It is like Detour in that regard. And also it's a lot about masculinity.
A lot.
Toxic masculinity and fragile masculinity. It's an interesting story for a woman to direct.
It is. And it's about the study of psychopathy in a way. You're watching everybody's issues come up. Nobody gets out. Nobody gets out without being exposed. And the criminal's already exposed. He has nothing to lose.
Right.
So he kind of exposes them. And he exposes that, what are you doing out here without your family? Or, why'd you go without them?
Well, there's a lot of that in Detour as well. And I don't know if this was ever intentional, but I also, a lot of those movies that are set in the desert, one, you get a lot of free production value.
Yeah.
And two, it's hell.
Yeah.
The desert is, it's hot as hell. And you're putting these characters are literally in Detour and in The Hitchhiker driving through hell.
Yes, I know. And they didn't have any kind of facilities. They had I saw a picture of them. They had bottles of water, on the side out of the shot. Just really hard to survive. You could see she was always in jeans and, whatever, some shirt and a cap. It was really hot. Yeah. It was a Lone Planet. And then she also, I think she picked up a lot of free shots in Chatsworth, Box Canyon, that area. Nobody was around then in the valley. I'm from the valley, so I'm an OG. And I know Chatsworth. There was nothing there, And she was directing.
Not like now.
Everyone's direct. Yeah.
It's not the jaw-dropping metropolis that Chatsworth is now.
No, but I mean, everybody was on Mulholland Drive, as you know, directing all those biker movies and everything.
Right. Yeah. and so she is, and it's a very big, it's a big hit.
Oh, huge.
But then she only directs one more movie,
which was Bigamist.
Right.
And that wasn't a hit. It was completely different and unappreciated. By the way, she worked in a Chinese restaurant and also in The Hitchhiker. She made sure she hired Mexican actors. Actually, Collier Young had to play a Mexican because but if you notice, there were no subtitles and there was Spanish spoken. Right. And it was enough that you could understand it, but I don't think she had money for subtitles, but she had the Spanish spoken, which is really modern.
Yeah.
Instead of guy with a Spanish accent,
No, yeah. She's so ahead of her time. And then what is her relationship with Don Siegel? Now, for people that don't know, Don Siegel,
they don't like each other.
They don't like each other, but they did work together, and they were. I like to say shopped at the same store. Don Siegel later went on to direct all the classic Clint Eastwood movies, and Clint Eastwood really modeled his direct. Clint Eastwood learned how to direct at the feet of Don Siegel.
Yeah, and also watching Ida Lupino. And he says it in a backhanded way. He said, I figured if she could do it, I could do it, which is a backhand.
That's
he watched her. He watched her directing TV because he was on Rawhide.
Right.
He was Rap Streets. And he said, wow. And by the way, his films are always very inexpensive, comes in under budget, on time, no frills, just like Lupino. Right. And keeps usually the original writers, doesn't change writers.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of times I know from people that I know that have been with on Clint Eastwood movies, he just wants to get out of there and go golfing.
Oh, yeah. It's a real soft set. Yeah.
Yeah. So she was in a film called Private Hell 36. That's right. That's not his first film.
No.
But it's a film that he made with it's the film that Ida Lupino made right after The Bigamist, correct?
Yes, they needed to make some money. And, it's funny because she was playing alongside Nick Ray's wife. And God, it's weird. His wife, they got divorced, and I think she married Nick Ray's son or something. It's very strange. But the two of them together were like the same, very similar actresses. So it's kind of a study in their acting more than anything else. And, I think Don Siegel was really more about big action to contrast them. And Lupino was more subtle in the way she depicted the same thing. So you're right. They were going along the same parallel line, but their styles were pretty different. He was just sort of simple action, and she was more complex.
So did she, after The Bigamist, she returned to acting, and then she also pivoted to television and became quite prolific directing in television.
Yes. And, this whole auteur thing that Andrew Sarah started, it was his pantheon, and he made the decisions. And he thought, she was a great actress, but when she stepped behind the camera, she wasn't any good. So he was wrong.
Clearly.
Yeah, totally. And even his wife, I like her work, but she didn't like her either. I don't even think they saw all her films. But and sometimes you couldn't see, you had to criticize or review a film without seeing it. If you can understand, I don't understand how that works, but she worked with some really big actresses. I mean, Claire Trevor did Hard, Fast, and Beautiful for her. She was a big actress, didn't need to do that, but she obviously thought the script was great and it was a great part. Claire Trevor also did a TV show for her, and the Alfred Hitchcock Presents. And then Jenna Rollins worked with her and loved her and thought she was a great director. So, she was just really, really well known.
She directed one of the most famous Twilight Zone episodes.
Yes.
And then starred in one of the other ones.
Yes. Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, Barbara Jean Trenton, that was sort of a take on Sunset Boulevard.
Yeah, sort of a pastiche on Sunset Boulevard. Yeah, it's an episode called 16 Millimeter Shrine.
Yeah, it was fantastic.
But she directed Masks, which is a very famous Twilight Zone episode.
Yeah. And it's rated the fifth highest of all of his episodes, by the way.
Yeah. And then so that was clearly Rod Serling had to hire her. Hired her for both. Mm-hmm. And then but it's just so funny. Alfred Hitchcock, The Twilight Zone, and then The Untouchables.
Right.
Then Gilligan's Island.
Yeah.
Bewitched. The script got to her desk. She would turn it around.
Do it. She wanted to work. And she said, I've had offers to go overseas, but I can't leave my family. Again, a product of her time.
Right. Yeah. And
not of her set.
Do you think that, again, because she just, I think it's just one of those things where Ida Lupino had to do what she did with as much invisibility as possible for the next woman director to have less invisibility.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, 21 years. And then Elaine May came along.
Right.
And Elaine May's not invisible.
21 years.
21 years alone. I don't know if I told you, but I have a website, ialapino.com, that you can go to anytime. And it's got a lot of stuff in there that isn't I couldn't fit it on the book.
Right.
Pictures, the colored pictures of the posters. Posters were so beautiful then. They're so beautifully made. It was about the title, budgets are in there, more budgets. I'm going to put some charts in. I'm going to add some charts. All her TV shows blow your mind. It's a great output. I don't know how she did it all. It's, a lot of work.
It's so interesting. I liken it to the Jackie Robinson story about how Jackie Robinson, when he went into the Major League Baseball, had to eat so much shit with a smile on his face. So the next black baseball player wouldn't have to eat as much.
I know. I know.
Michelle Obama straightening her hair to be the first lady. So the next black first lady might not have to. It is a sad fact, but it is nonetheless a fact.
Yeah. It persists, doesn't it?
Yeah. I think that's, that was the criticism level to Meghan Markle, which is that she refused to eat shit with a smile.
Right.
How we got there from here, I don't know. So how does she, after all that directing, and then she ends up acting again?
Yeah.
And did she live long enough to see her work as a director gain notoriety?
No.
Sort of appreciate an appreciation for her work as a director. Did she live long enough to see that?
Well, she was in the Peckinpah movie, Junior Bonner,
right,
with Queen, and famously, she was only 12 years older than Steve McQueen, and Steve McQueen said to Peckinpah, "When I look at Ida, I don't see my mother," and she said, "Well, good, because when I look at you, Steve, I don't see my son." And they used to go to the races together, and they would leave Peckinpah out. And I guess they bet on some horse named Ida's Pet, and won, and Peckinpah was pissed. She hired Peckinpah early on in his career. So he looked all over the place to find her. He finally found her. But then apparently what I've been told is he was really brutal to her on set. But if you look at her performance, it was so modulated. And, she did win British Film Awards, and she did win New York Critics Award. I think she tied with she tied with somebody for Junior Bonner, but she knew she could act. And I think she felt a little prestige around that, but her marriage was just killing her. And, basically she was just eaten up in the end, even though she tried not to be. You make choices in life. I think probably Howard was a bad choice. Collier Young was a good choice. But, she didn't love him anymore. I don't know.
Two actors in a marriage, always hard. Lot of masks.
But I think she enjoyed working. And all those TV shows, I think she really enjoyed it and felt good. And, she left a lot to be seen. And now things are coming out on video now, or on TV or whatever the newest form is. Media is really searching for her work. I mean, when I first started this, I couldn't find anything. And now you've got really good. I restored her TV show, Number 5 Checked Out, which was again with Bill Tallman. It was and Peter Lorre, which was excellent. And I'm restoring Not Wanted now. I'm not doing it, but I mean, they're doing it in Burbank at Roundabout.
Has any mainstream director, male or female, ever sort of cited her as an influence in a way that's a little more respectful than what Clint Eastwood said?
Well, I think Scorsese, definitely.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
He
Maybe the one I quoted.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of quotes from Scorsese. I sent this to him because I'm friends with his agent. He loved her. He admired her. He said her pieces were like chamber pieces, and they were quiet films. And quiet films, like Cat People, very quiet film.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really, she was that person. She was very quiet.
She was very quiet. She was very engaged.
Both.
She was just very engaged in the world.
Yeah, without being hyperbolic.
Yeah. So what is next? Are you working on? You have idalupino.com for the stuff that's not in the book.
I'm working on a graphic novel with Matt Southworth, who has a memory with you in the Valley. I don't know. He knew you back when. He's an artist. And,
okay. Is this a fictional work or?
Oh, it's kind of a true story that I'm fictionalizing. It takes place in 1962 in the San Fernando Valley.
Oh wow! Oh, that's so up my alley.
Yeah, it's kind of a Chinatown for pre-teenagers.
That's fantastic. As sort of a biographical story that you're fictionalizing.
If you can make any sense out of that.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. Well, look, thank you so much. The book is Ida Lupino, Forgotten Auteur, From Film Noir to the Director's Chair. It's there's so much information in it, but it's a fast read. It's an entertaining read. And she's just such a fascinating and underrated, Hollywood personality. It's alarming how underrated she is. I'll leave it at that.
It is.
Yeah. Alexandra Saros, thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, thank you, Dana. I loved it. It was so much fun.
Other podcasts reach for the sky. Dana Gould bound.
We barely try.
This has been the Dana Gould Hour, brought to you by the Internet. Music by Andy Paley with Jake Posner behind the board. Produced by Jeff Fox. Graphic design and web production by Spencer Hunt and Segan Friend. Sound editing and post-production by Jalinda Palmer and Joe Napolitano. Tom Kenny speaking.
I'm a DJ, I'm a person, I'm a singer, I love to sing and DJ. Boom! Peace out. You want me? Peace out. Boom.